Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Tuesday, May 2nd work session for Board of County Commissioners.
May 9th.
May 9th.
You missed a few days.
That was out there.
It was?
Got the wrong one. May 9th.
I just posted the ones she gave me in my bag.
And we're going to start with the Regional Housing Authority for the Roaring Fork Valley presentation.
I should check to see if those are the...
Oh, George, I was hoping I had another week.
See ya.
Well, first introduce yourselves to the public.
David Myler and Bill Lamont.
Yeah, well, I'm glad to see you here. I keep on reading in the paper that you've already talked to Picken County, and I was wondering maybe if I missed something, so welcome.
Well, Steve has been very generous with his time, and we've been discussing these issues with him for several months. He was in an initial sort of focus group discussion in my office. Gosh, I can't remember when that was. It was in the fall, I think. And we had some representatives from BOCC and Garfield County and Carbondale. So that's been the extent of my contact with Picken County, and also the director of APSHA has been attending a number of meetings that we've been discussing the idea that has been floating around since about last fall. And since that time, we've met with the elected officials in just kind of going from bottom to top, but Newcastle, Glenwood, Carbondale, BOCC, Eagle, and Garfield. And we've obviously been communicating with Steve, but now it's time for us to sit down with all of you guys and tell you a little bit about what we're doing and see what your interest might be in participating on a regional basis in the production of affordable housing. I like to think of the Roaring Fork Valley as a single community with a very mobile workforce, with people who make their housing decisions, based on where they work, but also on where they want to live, where they want to put their kids in school, the lifestyle they want for themselves, and so on. And I think that, as with transportation and with maybe open space acquisition as an example, housing the workforce outside of the mitigation programs that every community has for new development, I think tends to lend itself to a regional approach. And looking at the valley as one community with one mobile workforce, and creating an opportunity and a mechanism to provide a permanent funding source, long-term funding source, for simply the production of housing. This is housing that is much needed in the valley for the benefit of obviously the people who live there, but also for the employers, and as a supplement and in addition to the housing that is generated out of new development. And I think, as we all know, certainly it's been obvious to me for many, many years, the mitigation programs don't provide enough housing, and there's a shortfall. And that shortfall exists not only in the Roaring Fork Valley, but all across the state of Colorado. I've been fortunate to serve on the CHAFA board for just about 8 years. My term is up in June. And we've heard numerous reports and analyses and studies of the workforce housing shortfall throughout the entire state, particularly in the rental arena. So I think it's ultimately going to be incumbent upon regions in the state to kind of take control of the housing production opportunities that might exist, to try to find adequate funding sources through a combination of let me repeat, sources, some of which local tax support will be provided, and in others it'll be the traditional federal and state opportunities, tax credit programs, and so on. So Bill and I began this process because we felt that a regional approach to housing made some sense, and we started talking to the managers of all of the local governments in the region. We moved on to elected officials, and I have to say, so far we have very serious buy-in to the concept. Everybody acknowledges that the devil's going to be in the details and trying to figure out a way to make a multi-jurisdictional housing authority work, but it seems like everybody realizes that this particular problem that faces every community in the region lends itself to a regional approach. And in talking to all of these governments from Newcastle to Aspen, either the number one or number two priority is housing the workforce. And so this seems to be coming along at the right time to be evaluated and to determine whether or not having the local governments get together and pool their collective knowledge and experience and interest in promoting workforce housing, whether we can create a truly regional effort. RAFTA is a good example of a regional solution or a regional effort to a regional problem. It's not perfect, and depending upon which local government you talk to, they either love it or they hate it, but it's working. One way or the other, it's working. It's providing an enormous benefit to the community in terms of mass transit, and I think we could apply the same principles to the production of housing. The type of multi-jurisdictional authority that we're talking about is a creature of statute. About 12 or 13 years ago, the legislature basically gave us the tool that we're talking to you and other local governments about implementing, and that is to form a multi-jurisdictional authority by intergovernmental agreement, and then go to the voters within the boundaries of that authority, and we all get to decide what those boundaries are, to see if they're willing to give us some property tax and sales tax or impact fees in order to produce housing. And this entity I see as the production arm of the various members. We don't, Bill can talk about this in more detail than me, but we really do believe that the synergy of all of these governments coming together and focusing on solutions to this problem, figuring out where the housing for the entire valley should be, where the transportation connections are, and actually raising the money to go out and build it or buy existing units and deed restrict it. There's all kinds of options that APSHA has used over the years that we can learn from and base our policies on, but it just seemed to make sense that a regional approach is something that we should give some serious consideration to, and the legislature has given us the tool in order to do that. The Regional Housing Authority would have the ability to go to the voters to levy up to 5 mils of property tax, 1% sales tax, and impact fees. And impact fees have their own criteria to pass constitutional muster. So that's it in a nutshell. We handed out a memo which says pretty much what I just said, and we'd love to get your input and find out whether Pitkin County would be interested in joining with the other governments in the valley, including Eagle and Eagle and Garfield, and get to work on an intergovernmental agreement that can address everybody's concerns and needs and interests and keep the ball moving.
Rachel?
Yeah, thank you, Dave and Bill, for bringing this to our attention and taking it on yourselves to start the conversation. I served with Dave on the housing board a long time ago. When they actually had city and county members on the housing board before that was changed, and I thought that was a good communication linking, and I certainly know Bill from past efforts statewide for good planning efforts. So I just have a couple questions to start before comments. Did you say that it would be formed by intergovernmental agreement or by a vote of people within that district? RTA was formed by vote.
The statute allows any combination of cities, towns, and counties to form an authority by entering into an agreement. No votes are required. The only role of the electorate would be in passing or approving taxes,
revenues,
and bond issues.
Okay, because that somewhat implies that then people could terminate the agreement if they ended up not not liking it, whereas RAFTA, once you voted to be in, you're in.
That's true.
Okay. And then
And parties can be added or withdrawn from the authority.
okay.
You have that flexibility. If it's not working for one of the local governments, they can pull out.
Yeah.
The rest of the authority could continue. And forming the boundaries of the authority, the pieces don't have to be contiguous.
Right.
Good
Check that
example, about 8 or 9 years ago, Carbondale, Basalt, and Glenwood actually entered into an intergovernmental agreement to create a multi-jurisdictional authority, but it never went anywhere. And there were gaps, obviously, between the boundaries of those entities. So
Then I'm trying to think, if this authority was formed, regardless of who all the members are, would it, for any projects that it proposed, be required to go through location and extent review? Because it's an authority, which kind of means your P&Z can say, hey, we don't like it, and you go ahead and build it anyhow. Or would they be subject to the land use provisions of the community they were proposing housing in?
unlike a special district, I don't think we would be entitled to limit reviews to the location and extent process. So the authority, if we were going to, buy some land in the Mid-Valley somewhere to build a project, we would have to comply with all of the land use regulations of the jurisdiction that we're in.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question, kind of getting some background on this as much as anything, I think, which are questions the public would clearly ask. Would it have condemnation authority?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I'm interested in something like this, but I have to put out a few caveats. One is I think sales tax, it would just be unacceptable as a form when you consider the high rates of sales tax we already have in the resort communities, and particularly perhaps this most recent state effort that said, hey, we're going to finance roads with 0.63 or 0.50. And, that's okay. We all kind of share the roads, and we desperately need to do something there as well. But I would hate, I think that once your sales tax reaches a certain point, you're not going to be successful with it, and it's something I wouldn't endorse. But I would imagine the intergovernmental agreements could prohibit that to begin with, or could, take that into account. The second is always the bigger stumbling block for me, frankly, and that is some level of concurrence with the land use codes. That if you have one community that's managed or slow growth and another community that's, we don't even do mitigation fees, or, we're approving at a different rate, it starts to feel unbalanced. And it just feels that there would have to be some concurrence with mitigation requirements in existing land use codes and processes as well, so that you have some equanimity across the board.
I think that's one of the questions that the board would be made up of. The way we've been talking about it is an elected official, or recognizing that the elected officials go to a lot of meetings, a designated representative from that community. Mm-hmm. And that group would be the one who makes these kinds of decisions. We recognize that one of the problems in the Valley right now is each community is doing its own thing, and that a regional look at the planning that's going on, where possible developments would make sense, and what kind of homework needs to be done before you jump in and take a project. Either the authority proposes a project or buys into a developer's project.
Sure. That
needs to be done in a much more considered way than is occurring at the present time.
Yeah.
The point of looking at from transportation, the tree farm is a good example of chaos that's occurring, and the individual neighborhoods and citizens, which you've never had to go through up here, objecting to something that you were proposing or going to approve. And
we've gone through that before, but
Cindy dyes her hair. That's why we know she's never gone through this before.
Yeah,
but
I'll do.
When we're talking about this, we're talking about this regional approach. We're also talking about doing regional homework. in order to try and be prepared to answer the questions that are likely to come up from the neighbors around a particular proposal. And for example, we've looked at the comprehensive plan for Garfield County, the 2031 plan they adopted, and any urban densities they propose go into the urban service area. Well, the urban service area they've identified is the 3-mile circle around the community, which is not very helpful when you come to the point of trying to decide where is their water, where is their sewer, where are the roads, what are the logical places for development to occur around Carbondale, for example. There's considerable ground that potentially could be developed and should be developed in a manner that would complement Carbondale and avoid some of the otherwise conflicts that could occur should an Aspen Glen come in and be proposed in the county again. Outside of the growth area, it probably wouldn't get approved because of what they're saying, because it's not within the 3-mile circle of, and I'm only using that as an example. I can get in trouble being quoted, but so that's one of the tasks that the success of the program would have to deal with. They would have to not only look at, okay, where can we push the housing easiest, but where does housing make the most sense, and whether it's the authority developing a program of housing on its own, which it has the power to do, or whether it's buying into a project that's being proposed by a developer. And so that is one of the major considerations.
I guess, and I want to turn over to others. I'm sure they have comments and questions. My final kind of comment on it then, is, because I know time is short, is that when I look back on the RAFTA RTA efforts, there was a good 2 years spent trying to push the ball up the hill, and then it was like, nope, we got to pull back and start again. And we did another 2 years, or a year and a half, getting the buy-in of all the local governments, their boards, their Chamber of Commerce's, the public, everything like that. And so I see this as needing, at least as much time, laying the groundwork, discussion. And the challenge, of course, is your boards change all the time, and that was part of kind of bringing everyone along and creating the financial model of equality that people felt was very severe. People, hey, we're gonna lose all our affordable employees up at Aspen if we pay for this system. We're gonna have to raise our rates down at the Glenwood Springs pool if we do this. There's a lot of small arguments or points of concern that really have to be addressed by the public and the business community before they move forward. I think the need is very, very clear, but it's not just something that you can start going out and negotiating intergovernmental agreements. And it's not so much the concurrence of the agreement of what the housing authority would be doing as much as the individual land use codes. Are they requiring the same exactions? Are they requiring the same percentage of affordable housing in the existing developments that they may be approving? What are their philosophies on growth in general? And so, again, those are just my concerns. I'd like to turn it over to other board members to respond to ask questions.
I agree with you, Rachel. I think some degree of consistency, maybe a word I would use, between the land use regulations of the members is I think, a good objective and goal for us to try to use this authority to promote. All of the jurisdictions that we're talking to have mitigation programs. They're a little different. Percentages are different. Some use percentage of job generation, some use percentage of units, but everybody's doing it. This authority we see as going the next step and providing the housing that's really necessary that isn't going to be provided by anybody's mitigation programs, and understanding that no community in this valley is ever going to house 100% of its workforce for a million reasons.
Okay. Thank you.
Patty?
Yeah, thank you for bringing this forward. And I think this is just the beginning of what's going to be a long conversation. So I'm interested in looking at it further. But in the interim, I do have two specific questions. The issue of us already being in a housing authority, can we be in two in the state? Is that legally allowed? I mean, we're already in APCHA. That's something we need to clarify. The other thing is the generation of revenues, moving it way down the line, if it was to move forward, and if we were to have a mill levy, for example, where would those money be used? It would be hard for me to support a mill levy paid for by the property owners in Pickens County that was being used in Silt. I think we have a tough sell on that one. So I think that's a question we need to be very clear about. Where's the money raised? Where's the money spent? We see that with some RAFTA issues. The money that's raised, Pickens County turned over our sales tax revenue directly to RAFTA, and we get a lot of service up in this upper end of the valley. So I think we need to have a fairness question answered there. So those are the two questions I have moving forward.
Everybody has those questions.
Okay, good. I'm not alone.
Right.
What we're proposing in the initial look, the initial start, is that it would go no further than Newcastle. That Newcastle on up the valley would be the extent of the boundary, and that's not even a given.
Right.
But
This is a work in progress.
Right.
But if we went west, we think the only thing that would make sense is another authority, a separate authority.
Okay, so let me change that to Newcastle. If the money is raised in Pickens County, we're spent in Newcastle. That would be a tough sell, I think, for the voters here in Pickens County.
Where the funds are spent need to have some relationship to where they come from. Everybody agrees with that. As much as we all can buy into the fact that we're one valley, one community with a mobile workforce, each jurisdiction needs to be able to go to its voters and say, we're going to get our fair share of these tax revenues, and we're going to spend them in a way that makes sense to us and works for us. Everybody needs to feel good about that.
Right. And that's of concern because, the county's been looking at land to put housing on in Pickens County on transit-oriented development type, housing. And we have not really been successful in finding that. And if you look at Pickens County's growth plan and the current, policy of not building housing outside of urban growth boundaries, that doesn't leave us with a lot. So that's a big question for us to have to answer and bring forward to the people who live here and work here and stay here.
Yeah, I share some similar concerns with Patty. RAFTA is a good example where you don't have down valley counties and municipalities who participate. They won't and they can't pass a tax to support RAFTA. Garfield County is gracious enough to help fund the hogbat service, but Garfield County won't put that on the ballot. Rifle won't. Silt won't. Eagle County this past fall had based on a survey, said two of the most important needs for Eagle County was housing and child care. That failed as well. I have a hard time thinking about subsidizing housing in the mid and down valley. We are one valley, but we're really not one community. We have different values, I believe. We have different land use codes. That's being exhibited very clearly in eligible right now in terms of values, and we're also part of APSHA, and so I don't see us divesting or diluting our housing funds, our general fund, which supports APSHA, in half with the city of Aspen. They're coming before us today for another $100,000 for their needs. So I think the idea for regional housing is a good one. For me, it centers more for the mid and down valley than up valley. We know that 60% of our workforce comes in from outside Pickens County. However, 60% of Glenwood's workforce comes in from west. So I don't see us, again, subsidizing where that housing would be, probably outside the UGB. The impacts would have on the transit system, which is basically at a maximum right now in terms of the ability to handle any new development. RAFTA is basically is going to have to be looking at additional funding, not even to expand their service, but just to continue to provide the need for that service within the valley. So I have a difficulty with this, at least from the Pickens County's participation on it.
I think where we are is this kind of discussion needs to occur on a regional basis. Because if you look down valley, as you know well, says the problems created by Pitkin County and
Every
land use-
problem's created by Pitkin
land
County,
use
according to
and
Dan
asphalt.
Valley.
And, as we heard yesterday in Snowmass, similar issues with RAFTA and others. And I think that where we are is at the point of trying to get the people representing each of the local governments in the valley to sit around the table and get those particular issues out on the table, and then to understand what the implications are should Pitkin County participate or not participate. Would there be circle the wagons down valley and say, well, we're not going to provide housing for people that work up in Aspen. We're going to provide housing for people that work in Glenwood or in Carbondale. And that's not going to sell. It's not going to go very far. We recognize that Eagle County failure last fall to be able to pass what they had done a survey about, but they did not do a needs analysis. They were not able to go out and say, here's the extent of the need that's being created by the job creation in Eagle County. Here's the deficit that we're facing housing our employees in Eagle County. There's a lot of homework that has to be done and a lot of discussion that has to be done to try and address these individual views. And as Rachel pointed out, with RAFTA is wonderful to some people and a disaster to other people. And,
Who are they?
who are they?
I've not heard that RAFTA is a disaster to anyone because we're getting solicited by even as far as parachutes saying we want service down there. So I would not agree
We
with
don't
that
want to
statement.
pay for it.
Yeah.
But
Well, we don't want to pay for it. We want the service. We want housing. We don't want to pay for it. We want child care, but we don't want to pay for it. So that's the common theme
Right.
consistently, certainly within Eagle and Garfield County.
And that's, again, why at this point, it's getting the people to get out, sit around the table, and to get those kinds of issues out on the table. What can we learn from RAFTA's approach that was taken? Is there a better answer if we approach it from
Yeah, hold on, Rachel. I'm going to get some
So-
other people. Greg, then Steve.
Great, thanks. I was going to ask you what the big limitations were, but they're coming out already. We're going to move on. If there's anything else you want to talk about here. The thing that I hear is that, we talk about a consistency of regulation coming up, also consistency of intention. You've got communities that their intent is probably clearly different, but I'm really grateful you came in, and I want to see something work. I would like to see. I know there are private developers in the valley who have ideas, and they're frustrated because they're not getting traction, whether it's in Basalt or anywhere in the Mid Valley. I'd love to see someone reaching out to them so we know who they are and what they have in mind, because I think many deals come together. People put these things together and then they go away because they get frustrated or turned down, and then we forget. For instance, am new. I don't even know they're around. So I would love to see something like this move forward. Maybe it can't include Aspen to Newcastle at the beginning, at the outset, but I'd think what could be the damage in getting started. And one way I would love to learn more about this and get started is to find out, what happened in the previous attempts. You said it was at Glenwood, Carbondale, Basalt, or some group had a nascent program to do this and somehow it never went anywhere. Why is that? Secondly, the other thing is we've brought the RAFTA analogy up several times, and I was going to say, what can we learn from the experience with communities who just don't have the same consistency of intention throughout the valley? But I would like to encourage you guys to keep on this, and I'd help however I could, and reaching out perhaps to the private community as well, just to see what people have in mind might be a great start.
We have talked to developers. We intend to include developers in the process. I won't mention which community, but one community said government shouldn't be involved in providing housing. Let the private sector do it. And so we pointed out that we'll be more than happy for him to sit down with the development community and the representatives that we have visited with. If we're going to if we get to the point where we have something to go with and are going to the voters, the development community will be there in the marketing of this whole idea and explaining from their perspective why they can't provide workforce housing that people can afford. So, I mean, it will be a joint effort between the private sector and the public sector if we're going to be successful.
Steve?
That's fine.
Thank you. I've thought a lot about the APSHA issue, that we are in APSHA. APSHA could raise money in the same way, but APSHA really has a structural problem the way it's set up. The city doesn't need to raise money because they have another source of funding. We could really use the money if we could raise money through APSHA in the outside of the, the unincorporated parts of the county. So John and I have talked about this a lot, like what are the different options out there, and one would be to have APSHA have APSHA go clear down to Glenwood or something would be one possibility. Another would be to have APSHA still exist in the municipality of Aspen, and we would still be a part of that, but then the unincorporated, or maybe at the edge of the urban growth boundary down, would be APSHA wouldn't operate there anymore, although Mike Kostrowski would like to have APSHA participate in like the management of the units farther down valley and be an active participant in the whole process. So to me, that for us is the biggest stumbling block, is what do we do with APSHA? How do we handle it? I would love to be able to have the taxing ability from APSHA or from the new group you're proposing in order to tie up the land that, there's land available right now in suitable locations, but it won't be there forever, or sometimes the price is already too high for what seems affordable, but now would be a good time to do land banking and just have the possibility of building housing in the appropriate locations in the future. If we let these opportunities get away now, then it'll be harder to get housing in appropriate locations in the future.
Rachel, then we're going to wrap this up.
Yeah, thank you, George. In a presentation like this, you're bound to hear the concerns that people have, and you've been hearing them from other communities as well. But as Patty has said, it certainly deserves a harder look, and we talk frequently about working regionally in any number of areas, and we do. What I think would be a valuable next step would be to kind of outline a bit of an implementation plan of, what are the steps for community meetings and organizing, whether it's a 2-day conference or day and a half at the end of that. How do you get there? How do you start the conversations? And then come up with a price tag for that activity so that it's not just on the backs of some citizen volunteers who care deeply about the communities you do. And then see what the buy-in level is of these governments and of these communities to say, okay, we'll put $25,000 in to see if this gets off the ground. We'll put in, whatever it is. But there has to be a funding program to even begin the dialogues in a serious way. I mean, quite honestly, the Aspen Institute Transportations Forum, I don't know if they're going to get somewhere or not, but there has to be dollars behind it. And dollars from communities show they're committed to trying to work it out. And so I would see that as kind of a next step. It's, again, following a little bit of the RAFTA model, and that was, at least for the first attempt, very heavily funded just by the city of Aspen. They had paid extra planners in their office. They loaned staff to the RTA or RAFTA as it was getting going. And so I think that to even go further to say how do we answer these questions, we need kind of a phased approach that, and this is a timeline. This will take 2 years. Our target would be to have intergovernmental agreements by when. And then what are some of the issues that we'd like all these community members and their elected representatives to work out.
That's a good segue into. Did you have?
No, I'm ready. I'm ready to hear.
What we're suggesting to the entities that we've been talking to so far is if they could select a representative to work with all of the others on a steering committee to try to put that implementation plan together with perhaps a first draft of an intergovernmental agreement that's probably going to be fairly bare bones and is going to need to be fleshed out with more input from particularly elected officials. And we also, as Bill alluded to, we feel that we need to get started on a needs assessment. That was a failure in Eagle County. They acknowledge that. We think it's necessary. We have gotten commitments from all of the other entities that we've talked to contributing some funds in the $5,000 range, not a lot. The CHAFA has committed to match whatever the total local contribution to that is. So if we get 50,000 from all the local governments, CHAFA will put in another 50 and we'll do a needs assessment. So those are the steps that we're intending to pursue to get to the answers to all the questions that you have.
Yeah.
It's going to be a process. We know that, you know that, we've all been through these things before, and it doesn't happen overnight.
Right.
So
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think the
we'd
group
like to
itself
solicit your
I think the
interest in
group
whether
itself will need staffing and a facilitator as opposed to just money for a needs assessment. I agree with a needs assessment, but I think that intergovernmental working group needs staff. Otherwise, I've just seen it before in other areas where it just, it's everybody's responsibility, so it's nobody's responsibility. So I'll leave it there. I know we're running.
I agree with you.
That's the two things that we're looking at. And one is the elected group or designated person representing that particular community on the elected group to talk about the intergovernmental and the bigger picture. We're also asking for a staff person from each of the communities who will deal with the details of, all right, how do we handle the planning, the land use, etc. And so that's where we've been coming out, is trying to get each of the communities to provide at least 2 people, elected official, staff person, so that we can keep everybody in the loop, as opposed to the 2 of us coming to you individually and then running to the next meeting, that's why it's taken as long as it's taken, trying to get on everybody's agenda.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much for the overview and the presentation. I think it's something that we'll have to discuss amongst the board, because I've heard different opinions and different approaches in terms of where we want to go with that, but I'm sure we'll get back to you and communicate to you.
Thank you.
So thank you again, and good luck.
Enjoy the day.
We have met with Dan Blankenship, what to do and what not to do.
Yeah.
So you
Thank
have
you.
met
Good to
with
see you.
Met with Dan.
Okay, let's see. The next is we're going to have part 2 or part 10 of our energy addendum. Ongoing.
Maybe this is part 9.5 out of 10.
It was a full weekend, 20 people.
I'm going to hand out really quickly this. It's a simple cost
Go around the
analysis.
backside so
Sorry.
you can avoid the wires. Thank you.
Simple cost analysis on some of the components of the matrix.
Yeah, simple thing.
That was asked for.
A simple
Yeah,
cost?
simple.
Word
Simple.
simple?
When it comes this large, you know it's really
The
simple.
print is big enough to read, so
I kept this
I'm okay
simple
with that.
just down to unit cost. It's not broken out by any
I'm
kind.
going to say simple in whose definition?
Well,
Less complicated. That's
Yeah.
what I meant.
This will be much less.
and if you give me a moment to get some slides up.
And just introduce yourself for
All right.
the public.
I am Brian Paul. I'm the Chief Building Official for Pickens County.
I'm Cindy Hubin. I'm the Community Development Director for Pickens County.
And, maybe while you're booting that up, Brian, I could ask Cindy a question. Just as a review, when we adopted the 2015 International Building Code, what did that do in terms of increasing the energy savings?
The estimate across the country with that code is about a 15% energy savings from where we were with the 2009 International Building Code. And just to take that a little bit further, why we're here today is to take that to the local level and look at more efficiencies for energy savings. And to recap what we did the last time with you is we did a real detailed look at some of the elements within an addendum, a local addendum, that might help us even promote more energy efficiency in the construction in Pickens County. And you asked us to come back and cost benefit that a little bit. So we have those numbers today with Brian. And we also tried to very clearly state what sort of overarching policy issues we're asking the board to look at, so that you'll know when, if you adopt this local addendum, exactly how that impacts the citizens of Pickens County from a cost perspective, as well as from a policy perspective overall, meeting some of our other goals with climate action.
And then my second part of that question, so we're expecting to see about a 15% energy savings adopting the 2015 International Building Code. With this proposed addendum, how much further are we pushing the needle, would you say? Any sort of estimate?
She looks to me.
Yeah. That's the technical.
But if you all wait, if I could just.
And Mona, you just introduce yourself for the public.
Hi, I'm Mona Newton, and I'm the Executive Director of the Community Office for Resource Efficiency. I'm sorry to jump in here. One of the pieces that we are talking about today our focus on the Renewable Energy Mitigation Program. So it's difficult to make that estimate because this would affect those houses that must comply with REMP. So it's also difficult to say how many, how large, what their choices are going to be. So I think it's difficult for us to give you that kind of an estimate.
Yeah, we didn't really set out, when we created the matrix, we didn't set out to quantify how much of an increase it would be over the 15. What we wanted to focus on were elements that weren't being addressed in the 15 that seemed specific to our area, and things that we thought could make a significant difference in the performance of the house, in the energy consumption of that house. And so I could probably go back and try to see where the quantification, or how to quantify that, but I think the biggest impact is if we're going to move towards net zero in the future, and that's our ultimate goal in the county, that these items need to be addressed in the building itself and the building envelope to ever get to that point. Because if you neglect the simple things, the improving the thermal envelope, the thermal bridging effect of the framing members and the windows and those components of the building itself, then no matter how much solar you put on the roof, you're not really going to be able to keep up with that energy use and the energy consumption that you're dealing with. Especially in an environment where you're not 100% electric, like in California, where you're 100% electric, you just put more panels on to kind of offset. Well, we're dealing with the gas consumption, and we're dealing with some of the other things happening in our specific area. So I even found a nice article on heading towards net zero. Let me pull that up. That's not the one. There it is. And in this, it was a guy from Fraser, Colorado, talking about getting to net zero. And if you scroll down to the highlighted items here, it says, but in most of the country, 3/4 of energy comes from natural gas, like us, for heating. Achieving net zero is a harder thing to accomplish, more complicated propositions than just throwing PV panels on the roof, although that's invariably part of the proposition. In most places, getting to net zero involves figuring out how to site the house properly, which we're going to address in the land use rewrite, is to properly site that house. A maximum solar gain, but then making sure that you don't overheat the house with too many windows and too much solar gain. But beyond the siting, the task is to ensure the building envelope is as tight as it can possibly be, which means a lot of insulation, but also means you pay attention to a lot of simple things like the thermal bridging effect. Only after you've figured out all of the above do you worry about adding renewable energy, mostly solar panels, or ground source heat pumps that can be effective as well. And if you scroll down a little farther in the same article, glass, even under the best circumstances, is not a good insulator. you can hit R60 insulation in your attic pretty easily, but an old-fashioned basic window is about an R window. We talked about that in the matrix presentation, that the windows were kind of a catch point. But even the high-tech windows only get you to an R12.5, so you still have an issue there. So when we went into the matrix, we started saying, what can we fix from the building department's perspective? Can we focus on the building components and those aspects? So when you asked for a cost analysis, what I started looking at is the cost change between the basic 2015 code and what it's asking for, and where we were heading with some of these component changes we were changing with the envelope. And if you look right away at the walls on the top of that list of that matrix, and I know I'm not answering your question directly, but if we go to that first line item, the walls, it's not a financial change at all. We're already asking for the same R value or equivalent R value. All we're asking and stipulating is they block that thermal envelope with that continuous insulation. So the cost impact really isn't that major. It's just the like-for-like change. It's just where that insulation is. And the building science guys that talk about this, his joke is, you don't eat your sweater. So putting more insulation on the inside and building that wall thicker and thicker doesn't necessarily accomplish as much as blocking that thermal bridging effect that we were talking about last time.
So are you saying filling the gaps?
It's a continuous.
So filling the gaps.
Continuing the insulation. Yeah, I'll show you a photo. Steve, you actually, Steve, you actually asked for what it would look like. I showed you the thermal ridging effect, and those are all the framing members giving off heat and letting heat transfer through them. This is from a company called DriveIt, who sells continuous exterior insulation. So look at the difference in that imaging and how blue the house with that house wrap actually is. So what we're trying to do is accomplish something that's going to make a difference and make a difference right away. The turnaround on that investment is an immediate savings. You've stopped that thermal ridging effect. So in quantify, I guess what's important to us. Where are we heading? If we are to go, let's make changes to the houses that we're now and improve the type of materials we're getting and focus. Start asking for the better efficiencies on the boilers and the furnace now, so that they're prepared for having to offset that. The nice thing about being closer to 100% efficient is that you don't have to produce as much on your site to offset what you're utilizing, because it's 100% reuse of what you're creating. So what we were looking at when we designed this was, how can we incrementally start walking towards our goal of net zero? Does that kind of make sense?
I love this. I love hearing it. The thing that threw me just now, you just said no impact on job cost, only stipulating continuous insulation on walls. Could you explain that? Because it seems to me that having to wrap it in such a way, in addition to what else is there, clearly is going to be an additional cost. So I need to understand that.
Sure. The IECC, the International Energy Conservation Code, currently asks for either the continuous insulation or an equivalency. The code will allow you to model that and kind of say, well, I'm just going to do full depth foam interior. So go to like an R28 in a 2x6 wall with the foam, spray foam. So that cost is even going to be more, trying to equate that exterior house wrap. So those costs start offsetting each other when you go for, but this is a better bang for your buck, basically, because if you put it on the outside, it's more productive than just beefing up how much insulation you put on the interior. So if we're already requiring that equivalent R value, or the continuous insulation anyway, all we're really saying is, let's go for the continuous exterior, because that's going to give us the better option, better payoff.
And Greg, right now we're just talking about new construction.
Well, but it's in the remodel and existing, but it'll come out of the recommendations from the energy audit, if it's possible, if you're going to take the siding off anyway, let's do that house wrap. So if their siding is old and deteriorating and leaky through the holes behind it, then that's a great time to do that house wrap and gain that same benefit that we're gaining with the new construction in our existing inventory.
Just to follow up on that, is the house wrap technology far enough along now that it's ubiquitous? You could do it on an old house in Aspen or Carbondale or anywhere. It's not. This isn't a high-tech experiment any longer, correct?
No, it's blue board or foil face board that's been around for forever. It's just not been that much utilized in this area until it started being required, or as a prescriptive recommendation in the 2009 code. It actually came out as an option. They could still model around it. In the 15, it's still an option. You can model around it. But what we're saying is, on these bigger houses that are bigger energy consumers and energy users, let's do that exterior house wrap as a mandate.
You know,
Thank you.
Sure.
we can continue with this conversation, but we're going to run out of time in terms
Sure.
of presentation and some of the decision points. So,
Really quick, are there multiple vendors available of this product? I just want to know, it's not a
a
kind of
technique.
sole
You can
or
go to
limited
Lowe's.
source?
You
Okay,
can go to
I just,
BMC.
thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
It's a technique.
absolutely.
Yeah, not just
It's
about-
really
Thank you.
just a different way of doing things.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
so you better fire away here.
Well, what I'd like to do in this, since we only have an hour, is not go too deep in more presentation. I think we've presented this a few different ways. What I'd like to do is kind of talk through the decision points so that we can maybe come back to the board in a regular meeting as presenting this as an ordinance for adoption. So what we'll have to do is go away for a little while after this work session and rewrite a little bit of the REMP ordinance that needs a little reworking to match more where we're going here, and write this into an adoptable type ordinance fashion. So if we just want to go through the discussion points on the agenda, we can do that at this point, if that's okay. The board.
Yeah, because you'll need to figure out what you need for direction, because we only have about 45 minutes,
Okay.
actually.
So
Absolutely.
I have a question. So do you want us to weigh in on each point as you go through it? Because if we're going to do that, should we weigh in now on the exterior wrap? Because I think it's great. My only concern would be radon issues.
I wasn't going to go point by point
Okay.
through the matrix
Okay.
because we kind of done that a few different times. I was going to go through general discussion points that I think I needed direction to come back with clarity. So if we could focus on that,
That'd be great.
and then we can discuss
Okay.
everything as a whole. Discussion points. The BOC requested a cost-benefit analysis. I provided that today. You didn't have time to look this over ahead of time, so I understand if more questions come up when we come back with the ordinance related to that. And we can have a little bit, if we have time at the end, to discuss some of the points I thought were relevant to discuss. So the decision points on the building envelope. Does the BOC agree with the proposed approach of the graduated requirements based on house size that are shown in the matrix itself? That we're doing less requirements on some of the smaller houses, more requirements on the over 5,000. However, if they get into that percentage of glazing issue, the smaller houses do have to do a few different items in the matrix. I'm just asking if that conceptually is something the board agrees with.
Yeah, I've always
understand?
been supportive of that.
Comments on that or questions, Steve?
I still would like to have the small houses do it up to the same standards as the big houses. And I actually just yesterday heard a presentation on impact investing, and there's a mechanism I think that we could possibly subsidize a more middle-income family who's building a house to build up to the same standards as the bigger houses, and that they would pay it back on a low-interest loan or some mechanism like that.
There could possibly even be core grants or something that comes out of other parts and other components of where we're heading with the ramp that
Yeah.
could be applied towards the smaller house. We thought about incentivizing the smaller houses. Instead of mandating the smaller houses, just work on trying to come up with some good incentives.
Yeah, because they would benefit, a middle-income or lower-income family with a house with a high heating bill. They're the ones who could really benefit from having a well-insulated house up to the best standards.
And the only reason we focused on mandating on the larger houses was because of when we were doing our REMP analysis, we ran into that curve that August was talking about last week, where all of a sudden there was this great increase in energy consumption once you got past that 7,500 square foot house. So we kind of focused on that 5,000 and above threshold as doing some of these mandates. We still felt in our minds that maybe it was better to incentivize the smaller. There's nothing saying they can't house wrap their house. And especially if they see that that's kind of the standard in the valley, I'm sure they're going to lean towards that. Everybody went to engineered lumber when our efficient building program started kind of steering things that way. So I think it'll kind of lead that way, that the smaller houses will take advantage of the same kind of options that the larger houses have once they see there's benefit to it, for sure.
But I'd like to point out, Steve, this is the policy question.
Yeah.
You know, do you want all houses in Pickens County to come to these standards, or do you only want to focus on our local addendum for the larger, more energy consumptive sizes of homes, which is, you know, once we get beyond the 5,000 square feet.
Patty?
George, I don't want to do anything that disincentivizes people that are middle income or lower to build a house, because we have enough problem with them doing that in Pickens County anyway. I think incentivizing them through core grants or whatever to do better things, righter, quote unquote, things is important, but I think definitely mandating at a certain square footage and up is critical. But, you know, Steve's idea of subsidizing, we can't give loans. Pickens County is not in the business of giving loans, so I don't know how we would work that out. It's a thought, but I think just pointing them in the right direction for grants and assistance is key. But I do not want to disincentivize or harm people in the middle class or lower from being able to build small family homes.
Patty, Rachel, or Greg, your thoughts or for direction?
And I was at other meetings during our last work session, so I apologize for that. I agree with Patty at a certain level, but for me, lower and middle class people don't necessarily build homes much more than 3,500 or 4,000 square feet. And so for me, the standard being 5,750 is too high to say you're exempted below that level. That's my impression. And, you know, I think the issue is getting so severe that it's a real wake-up call. It should be a wake-up call for everyone. You know, the newest study on lack of oxygen in the oceans, which is going to lead to the collapse of the fisheries, to the newest iceberg breaking off in the Antarctica, you know, it just, or is it Greenland? I'm sorry. It just is very, very, both. It's very, very scary. And I think, you know, I don't want to be looking back in 10 years and saying, well, why didn't we go further when we had the chance? And so the other thing that really strikes me, and again, we just had a great discussion about Pickens County and the Valley and the housing issues and things like that. I see more, you know, as a metaphor, more people being able to say, hey, I'll pay whatever that lot costs, and now I don't want to spend the money on the house. And I'll spend whatever it takes to get in the community. It's a $600,000 lot or whatever. And I realize people may be stretching to do that. But at the same time, it's kind of like, okay, and now I want to save money on the structure over here. And I think that we need to have some concurrence between those values. You want to buy the lot in Pickens County for a given reason, for the quality of life, for its environmental values. And if you want to be able to buy a house in a community that doesn't care, there's other resort and communities that you can do that. And so that's my impression, is that I think 5,750 would be too high of a cutoff. I would look at something lower, closer to 4,000 square feet if we were going to go that way at all. The second concern that comes up for me on those house size issues is affordable housing. And I think if we're building affordable housing, we want to see it as, you know, and that's a government-sponsored project. I want to see that coming up to these sort of standards. And if you say, well, it's going to be too much subsidy to do a housing unit to this quality, well then, you know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And so affordable housing homes, you know, they may have changed the standard, but for single families, you know, such as up at Twin Ridge, those are 1,500 square foot homes. Those are much smaller. And so I think that we need to look at, I'd rather do it across the board if we had to kind of be pulling out some sort of arbitrary line.
You know, just to clarify this, when I look at this, this sheet that you handed out,
Yes.
this is showing a graduated system. And when I look at this, for the most part, going up to 5,000 square feet, you're pretty much using current codes, and a lot of this requirements as you go beyond 5,000 is also similar. So tell me where the distinction is, because that may answer some of these questions and concerns.
Yeah. Right now, there is basically just a break point at that 5,000. Anything below that 5,000 is current code.
Current code.
Unless they exceed that 15% glazing, then there's a few more stipulations that kick in. As you go down a little farther, there's things that go across the board, like the efficiencies of the boilers and the efficiencies of the furnaces. Those apply across the board.
All right, so it's sort of a generic breakout. So it's really not 5750. It's 0 to 5,000 and 5 to 750 and 750 above.
Correct.
And so for me, that makes sense. Greg?
I'm kind of leaning toward what Rachel had said about making it across the board. It should apply to everyone. We don't know where people are going to go with house size. It's be surprising, but house sizes may start dropping because they're becoming more fashionable. I don't know if we're going to allow tiny homes anywhere soon, but it'd be great to have a standard that applied to everyone. And went for the same goal. I'm listening to what George is saying. It's like maybe it's not such an issue, but I'd like it also to be a fairness issue, so people perceive this as not discriminating in any way against any economic class or anyone else, but just this is the new standard as we aim for net zero and energy efficiency. That's where I'd like to see it go, and I think it's great. What you're doing is great, and I look forward to hearing more.
Can I respond? Also, when we started looking at this, we didn't look at it as a be-all, end-all approach. We looked at an incremental step. Mm-hmm. So if we find that we have these great successes in what we've mandated up here on the higher end, and we want to implement them on the lower end, I think that's something we could, when we do the next energy code adoption in 2000, we're going to skip 18, we'll do 21. We can also come back with this addendum. Attaching it to the adoption of the energy code gives us that flexibility to say, hey, wow, we saw such great successes in these upper ends. Let's move it across the board. So as we look at this, I don't think we need to look at today we got to fix everything. I think we're looking at the incremental approach to where we're heading down the road. And that's one of the questions that we get into too, is where does the board see how far are we moving the needle, towards our ultimate goal.
And the other point that you mentioned earlier is that we still have the ability to incentivize the smaller homeowner builders, and certainly CORE has the ability to provide grants. We're still trying to pursue a residential PACE program to help with that. So there's different tools and mechanisms that we have to encourage people, incentivize them to become more energy efficient, and but without having to mandate it at this point. Greg?
I've asked a naive question. Is this are we working toward doing the same with commercial buildings and any building construction?
This applies purely to square footage of whatever type of construction.
Not just home construction. Got it.
Yes.
So I'm not sure we've got a consensus here, direction for you. I've heard a few of us say we're comfortable with the presentation and graduated. A few just wanted straight across the board.
In response to Rachel's thing about affordable housing, we can always do that. It doesn't say you can't do it. So, and I agree with you. You got to put your money where your mouth is, and what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And so, I don't have a problem with that at all. I also wouldn't have a problem with looking at 4,000, but if we're going to start with 5, because we have to have a nexus somewhere, and we kind of have that 557.5 already established. And I think people in smaller homes may be incentivized just on their own merit to do the right thing. So I just, again, do not want to disincentivize it. We don't have enough people coming forward to build those small houses with middle incomes, and we want them as part of our community. And I don't think we should do anything that says go somewhere else who doesn't require you to do the right things, but let us help you do the right things.
So are you still in support of the graduated method as presented and utilizing incentives?
Mm-hmm. And reviewing it as we go along.
Yeah. Remember, the 5750, and Cindy, you can clarify this, that number came up, it grew from 5,000 because we allowed 750 for garage space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Rachel?
I could compromise on perhaps lowering the threshold down to 4,000 square feet because, again, I'll go back to an AH home, single family is 1,500. And, so you could fit 2.5 single family affordable housing zones in one 4,000 square foot house. And I really appreciate the concept of driving people off or the cost being too high or things like that. But at the same time, if you're talking about long-term affordability, it has a lot to do with what your monthly bills are, and if you save some on the construction, but you're going to be paying higher utility bills summer and winter, you really haven't gained anything. And actually those dollars, instead of going towards a permanent improvement, which would be the home cost or the mortgage, it's going to a utility company, and it's not really buying you anything over time. And so, it really strikes me that, to say higher standards start at $5,000 or $5,750, $5,000 for the home, knowing what the garage is. But, some people have their garages fully heated or air conditioned year round. It's not as if, it's the old, Mayberry garage that's cold and attic and not, it's just not the same. So, and you see garages potentially converted and used for other purposes at times as well. So I think that, a 4,000 square foot level would be a buy-in for me, and it's also not taking it all the way down to zero and everything.
So, and I thought I heard you were okay with that, Patty?
With that?
I'm okay with that. Steve and
Be
Greg?
okay with the package of incentives for smaller houses.
Yeah.
Okay. Greg? All right.
And that's a way,
So just
good place
adjust
to
it
start.
to the break point being at 4,
1,000 of the home.
4 and above, 4 and below. Okay.
All right, good. All right, great.
Great, that's awesome. The second question there was, does the BOC agree with addressing the existing home inventory through applying the standards in the attachment? And that was talking about if it's greater than 1,000 square feet of addition or remodel, or greater than 20% of total floor area being added or remodeled, that we would address things like the crawl space ventilation, the attic ventilation, the insulation values, the window values, based also on the home energy audit done by Core or whoever they hire for that energy modeling.
So again, what you're saying is additions greater than 1,000 square feet or 20% of the existing floor area, whichever is less, requires the following.
And that was somewhat based on the 5,000 because 20% of 5,000 was 1,000.
Right,
So
so
if we alter the 4,000, we might need to alter that a little bit. But
okay, Rachel?
I just want to be clear, and maybe for the public as well, and again, I apologize for not having memorized it from the last meeting, but if someone hit the trigger in their existing house, the 1,000 square feet or 20%, does that mean that they potentially would have to take off the siding on the entire house? Or how much more work on the existing structure will it trigger?
the way I was looking at it was, one, it's feasible if they were doing work in those areas already. So if they were already replacing siding as part of the operation, what they're doing, it's a great time to put that exterior house wrap on. If they're already working in the crawl space or adding equipment in that crawl space or doing something that would perform better in a conditioned crawl space instead of a passively vented, bringing cold Colorado air into your home situation, we would address it then. So that's where the home audit would come in, assessment would come in. It'd be kind of an inventory of what needs to be done or could be done this time. And I think that could be presented to the applicant. We could work through that too, if there could be a give and take.
Yeah, I just don't want it to be that, hey, we finally saved, similar Patty's concerns, we finally saved the money to add a garage, it's 1,000 square feet, or 750, and so now we've got to re-insulate the whole house, or something like that. It's not going to be that sort of burden.
No, I envisioned it more as, let's try to improve the existing inventory where we can, when we can.
Okay, I just think it'll be important to have some very clear criteria for yourselves, so that no one can say it's selective enforcement.
Okay.
Can I just ask, what is the current for fire, indoor fire? There's a trigger point for that too, isn't there?
Indoor fire.
When you have to,
For exceeding 5,000?
5,000.
yeah, but then if you go in and remodel, is there a trigger there?
Yes. Once you take off the drywall, or if you have attics and crawl spaces that's accessible to put the sprinklers in, and you're
And
in
it
that
triggers it.
5,000
So
above,
it's kind
it
of
would
the
trigger.
same thing. What makes sense makes
Evaluation.
sense, and it's great to be making sense.
Yeah.
Other
Just
comments?
required the assessment.
Steve, Greg, you comfortable with that? Greg?
I'm comfortable just thinking about if somebody comes in, they have to tear off the siding only on the south-facing side of the house. So they'll bring up to code just on the south side, but if they don't pull the siding off anywhere else, will that be disincentivizing people? I'm just wondering what are the unintended consequences, and it'd be great to have a code or a system that anticipates some of that.
Definitely. We can talk about that too as they do the home assessments. We can say what criteria, what threshold drives that, because you wouldn't see much benefit off of doing one side. But how often does someone just replace one side of their house siding? I mean, I guess it happens, but I
It's
think
baked in the sun, for instance.
Sure, definitely.
Just thinking about that.
Yeah, or water damage, sometimes, or fire
In an
damage.
old
There's
house.
things that happen to a portion of the house that doesn't happen all the way around. I think that's when we have to make positive judgment calls that actually would make a difference, because the goal is better performance for the house. Making them do it just to make them do it doesn't get better performance out of the house.
Right.
So I think we need to look at that logically, as are we really making a difference?
Right. George, can I just ask you, I'm going to go back to this, when we're talking about thermal bridging and ceiling houses and no Colorado fresh air coming in, you know, we have such a high radon issue in this community. I want to make sure that we're doing proper radon testing and ventilation for that, because we had so many people who sealed their homes in Smuggler and then realized their radon levels just went sky high, so they had to go back in and retrofit. I just want to make sure we don't lose that as we move forward, because it's such a huge issue here.
It's actually required in the 2015 IRC.
Make sure that we're keeping people safe, keeping them warm and healthy.
That's right.
All right,
Or cool and healthy.
everyone comfortable with that? Moving that policy ahead?
Great.
All right, thank you.
Now, getting into REMP, that's the next section. We didn't really get to go over that as well in the last meeting, and I know we're running short on time in this meeting. But, and my consultant's not here to really get in depth into the calculation format, but conceptually, and I can bring up the slideshow if we want to go through the slides that talk about the thought process behind where we ended up. I just want to ask if the principle of what we've done, which was taking the original logic and bringing it into today's numbers, still makes sense, and that's one of the decision points. And then we get into the duration. And so let me read through these, because I have these worded in a way
I just had to look up the definition of duration.
Duration, yeah, not duration, but
I'm
duration.
like, duration, what does that mean?
Derating, yeah. So does the BOC agree with the...
Answer Patty's question.
Sorry.
Duration. We're still on duration.
It's the act of discontinuing rationing.
Exactly. It's one of those circular definitions. What we've done is we took the old philosophy of how we calculated REMP and the numbers behind it based on offsetting. But the board said not just offsetting in a wind farm or somewhere else, offsetting here locally on your site.
On site.
And so those numbers and all the math behind the panels, the PV panels on that site. When we took those numbers and calculated it out, it basically doubled the dollar per square foot cost to offset REMP.
Right.
But it also, because we used to look at 100% trade-off, those numbers, what you get in credit for putting in a solar system, they went down. So the dollar value, bottom line, doubled. From what it used to cost about $34 per square foot, it went up to about $68 a square foot in the new math. So then we said, wow, that's not going to sit real well with the public and with the board. So we came up with this duration idea, where we could take that number, multiply it by a factor, a percentage, reduce it down to a similar number to today's numbers. So that's what we did in the presentation. I actually have a worksheet that shows an actual house from 2009 code that was a 13,000 square foot home and what that dollar amount came to. And then we did that based on the new numbers. It was basically double, and then you add in the house size based on the BTU number, and then you add in the heat tape number, which we never did before, and the fact that those numbers went down as far as your trade-off, and it becomes a pretty aggressive number. So the duration calculation brought it down to the old values, basically,
But
an
with new
equivalency, but with the new background calculations behind it. So we have the math and the understanding of what 100% offset looks like. But we derate it down to today's numbers. So we can find any level in between there, from 50% duration to 100% duration, which is 0, back to 1, and you're paying full amount. Or
Right.
we can back it down to 50%, or back it down to 20%, or back it down to where it's at right now, so that it equates to what people are currently paying, so it's not a big sticker shock, especially when we add in the new
But
way
it makes better sense for what we're doing today.
But we have the math where we can roll it forward and take the duration away to actually achieve the 100% offset eventually, in whatever timeline the board wants to look at doing that.
I think I need a lesson in physics here. My question is, currently, the way we assess rent fees is based on square footage. And so that, no or yes?
For what factor?
Just square footage. It's $1 per square foot.
On the house.
On the house
size.
on the house.
Correct.
If you're over the 5.
If you're over 5,000. Okay. Yeah. So, and that was very simple. I mean,
yes.
It was easy to come up with a number. It didn't perhaps equate to actual energy use. So now we're looking at going away from that slightly and going into utilizing BTUs. Mm-hmm. So my question is, how do you determine when a house is being built off the plans and going through all the different plan changes to come up with a fee, understanding what the BTUs are going to be?
So that's where August came in, my consultant.
Okay.
And he can explain this really well when we actually bring the ordinance forward, because I think that's an important factor. But what we did was we took the same logic that we used for snow melt in your driveway, and we took that BTU per square foot number, and we were able to quantify now, based on houses above 5,000, how much it would take to offset that additional usage that you're going to see in those higher brackets. So when we did that, took that analysis that Core provided that showed some of the local usage in some of the homes, and we had that curve where when you hit 7,200, it really started being, in our area, it was like 115 BTUs per square foot usage. Well, we thought that was a little too unreasonable, so we backed it down to more of a national average, which is about 72, 73 BTUs per square foot. We took that number and now multiply that to the square foot above the 5,000 to come up with a BTU per square foot usage per year for that square foot of your home, and we multiply that times that per square foot number above 5,000. So it's very complicated math, but really it's the same principle behind what we do with snow melts or pools or spas. We're just seeing how much it would take to offset that additional usage for that bigger home and putting a number to it. So right now we have it back down to a duration that brings it closer to that $1 per square foot, just for the example we had for the presentation. Just because of the sticker shock once again, because when you start multiplying that number times some of these bigger houses, you get into a big dollar amount. So in principle, we just wanted to see if the board agreed with that concept of starting to tax, or not tax, but collect a fee based on that use above and beyond.
And this is on top of heat tape pools, melted driveways?
Yes.
Oh, that, okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
It always was.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that we didn't lose that part.
The city did away with the house size. We kept the house size from the board's direction, but we kept it at that old $1 per square foot
Right.
principle.
So we're
Once
just-
you exceeded 5,000, you paid every dollar up to that point. This new concept, you don't pay until you break 5,000, and you only pay for what's in excess of 5,000. So there's no multiplier against the first 5,000
Right.
going into it. It's only the above and beyond.
Okay, got it.
Rachel?
It's interesting to me because it reminds me of the School Funding Act in Colorado after the recession, when schools were supposed to get this much and then they came up with the negative factor. And so, but this is comparable perhaps to housing mitigation when, the full cost to build a unit would be X. If you charge that as a fee to everyone, it's too much, and so it's reduced by some appropriate percentage. So I think the term duration is confusing to people. I'd love to find another term for that.
Sure.
But
It's August.
I think that what I'd like to see is something like this concurrency with the code and make that at a 4,000 square foot break point as opposed to 5,000.
Okay.
And then I can go forward with what you have, and I guess it's a matter of taking a look at what that reduction percentage should be of the total comp. And so to that end, I don't want to be throwing darts. And so I think we need to find a way to better measure impact.
Okay.
I can reduce that fee, because the other component, I believe, is still that if they can offset some of that energy use on site, somehow that fee gets reduced
Correct.
by that amount. So I think we need to be very clear about that. But I think that kind of getting to a sense of impact will help us all understand how much to reduce that.
Rachel, clarify for me. You said you wanted to reduce the obligation to offset energy via REMP from 5,000 to 4,000. You want to actually lower that?
Yeah, I'd like to see that.
Okay, well that will certainly impact more of the middle class, the normal homeowners when you get down to that level. So
I think we need to see, there has to be a nexus. You can't just, I mean, when we did the land use code of 57.5, we had to come up with some justification for picking that number to sell it to the community. And so just, I think I understand Rachel's thinking, but we're just kind of grasping 4,000 over here and saying, let's stick by that without.
And that broadens your net, like George was implying there, is that you've brought more people into the paying side of things.
But I would like to say, just having looked at all the master plans in the neighborhoods, we're, tucking up against 4,000 is almost an average size home in Pitkin County now. It's right in the 38 square foot, 100 square foot range. So there is some nexus there as far as the average size.
I'd like to see some of that. I mean, I think that's important.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm willing to continue to discuss it. I
think it's a thought to be discussed.
Okay. So the direction to bring back with an ordinance, or do we want to have another work session specifically with REMP once I have August back?
I would like to.
I think one more might be in order. And the other thing I really wanted to ask, which I didn't get a chance yet, and doesn't have to be answered now, is how similar or parallel are the city codes on REMP and the county codes? Are we going to be, but again, we can look at that work session.
Okay.
Greg or Steve, any comments or thoughts?
Definitely feel like we need more time with it. Wrapping my head around it, there's a lot of consequence here I don't quite understand. So I want to see more and learn as more as I can.
And even those 5 or 6 PowerPoint slides that we didn't get to last session would help kind of understand how we arrived at some of the numbers too, if that's helpful.
Now, if someone were to build a 4,000 square foot home but have a heated drive or a pool, they would be subject to rent regardless.
Yes.
If they exceeded the budget for that.
No, that's regardless. If they put in snow melts or a pool or spa, they're paying. Paying for exterior energy. This is only going into the house now. This is the first time we've addressed interior energy. And it was kind of a direction we were looking at. We were trying to come up with a BTU per property allotment or some way of quantifying how to start going after that excessive interior energy use and not just exterior. So this is kind of breaking ground on actually asking, other than the dollar per square foot we used to ask for, asking for a specific rent fee paid on BTU usage per year interior.
So I guess
or on-site mitigation.
Or on-site mitigation.
So I guess the issue, the concern is at what square footage level do we implement that? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Absolutely.
Rachel?
I think it'd be helpful for the next meeting as we kind of finalize this. I've used this technique before, but today, can you give us some narratives? Mm-hmm. We're looking at charts and matrix and numbers, but if you could give us a few examples of what someone with a lot, just a plain lot, is going to build, what would they go through for this exterior ramp, the interior ramp, if it's over 5,000 square foot as it's talked now, or if we dropped it down. And so give us some narrative examples of this, which Cindy can do because she's a great writer and you can all put together. But I think that helps as opposed to just charts.
Yeah, paint us the picture.
Steve?
I like the fact that we are spending more time on this than the United States Congress is spending on changing the Affordable Care Act. I think we're doing it right, taking our time and looking at it.
I would rather get it right.
Making sure it's the way we want it. And
we
it's
need to
doing
vote
what
tomorrow.
we want it to do.
Okay.
Then the Senate can fix it.
Okay, so let's keep away from the federal issue.
So one
Next.
more work session for REMP
Okay.
specific.
Yes, please.
And was that it on this for your direction?
Well, there's no reason to go on with action items on REMP because I don't think we're ready to kind of move forward with that
Okay.
yet. I think we have good direction on how to start writing the building envelope ordinance portion of this. We'll come with it all as one package, but we can start working on that portion and refine the REMP
We're
narrative.
ready with all the REMP discussions, so we'll just set up a meeting pretty soon with you to go over it so that we can pull it all together and come back with the ordinance.
Okay, Greg?
Quick question, just regarding it, assumptions based on KBTU per square foot usage, as this is a fee going in. Is there any way we can monitor, have a system of monitoring the actual use? Because it's going to be a very wide disparity. And somebody's going to say, wait a minute, I turn the heat off when I leave. Well, this other guy leaves it on, and we're all paying the same amount. Do we need to discuss that as well?
I actually wrote that in as a discussion point or comment in the matrix, that I think it might be wise to offer that if someone is willing to put monitors on, because we can't really force them to go into monitoring, but if they're willing to cooperate with having monitors on the system and come back with their energy bills or some proof that this was an unjust fee or an unjust amount charged, then sure, we could offer them a payback or a refund of those fees. I think that would be something that would be a good way to approach the first time we ever take a step towards going after
good
interior
knowledge.
energy.
And Holy Cross Energy has automated, had the AMI, they had the automated
Your
meters.
microphone, you
Oh,
need,
I'm sorry. Holy Cross Energy has the automated meters, and they're not really utilized. And so that the homeowner could actually utilize that data to share it with us pretty easily.
I think that's a fair approach, especially, like I said, for the first time we ever really kind of breach that exterior versus interior usage.
They'd have an incentive to do this, it seems, in that case.
Yeah.
Can I
Patty?
can I get one more definition just for clarity? Thermal bridging.
Oh.
Just to define it so the public understands what we're talking about.
That was that picture that I had up.
Oh, so
I know,
that's
but
thermal
explain
bridging.
it
Sure.
verbally.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the effect that basically heat escaping your home or cold coming in, either one, finds the path of least resistance. So the framing members in your wall, the insulation between is very dense and slows the passage
Right.
of air and cold and temperature through there. But the thermal bridging happens in any place like the wood framing members, the corners where there's multiple packed out studs in a corner, or the windows themselves act as a big opening in that R value. And we showed a slide that said that if you have 15% windows in a wall that's even R50, it reduces that whole wall to basically be R15.
Everything goes to that
Because
cascade.
it's like a balloon deflating. It all finds that place. So a lot of times thermal bridging happens at the metal members between your windows. If the windows are good quality, then the metal actually transfers the heat and the cold back and forth.
So it's a way
that's
to
basically
bridge
thermal
from
bridging.
one side to the other.
A bridge.
I have a quick analogy of thermal bridging. If you were to pick up an uninsulated frying pan or a teapot off your stove, that heat goes directly into your hand.
So you'd rather have that pot
If
holder
an
in
insulated,
between.
the pot holder,
I'll remember that next
That's
time
your
I
insulation.
run back my hand.
Rachel?
I just wanted to kind of respond, Greg, to the question how you asked it. What you always have to remember with all these structures is it's not about the current owner, it's about the future owners and future use. So one could be very, very frugal with their energy, but then the very next owner isn't. And I always recall Jack Hatfield's kind of comment when we were working on this quite a while ago, and that was that the more of the smaller houses he was managing, he was seeing more and more intensive high-end energy use. Just flat screen TV in 5 rooms, and just major energy draws that even though it was a very small residence. And so I think that we need to kind of bear that in mind as the whole world becomes kind of computerized, automated, and artificial intelligence run systems. So that's kind of my look at it.
we want the data.
All right, well, thanks, guys. We're
very much.
moving ahead.
We're moving incrementally. That's okay.
It's a lot of information, a lot of data.
There's some hope out there.
Right.
Yeah,
Thank
but
you.
a lot of hard work, but thank
Thanks,
you.
Mona.
If you ever know anything about me, I want to get it right.
I don't know.
I just looked at my thing, it's like, I've got
Okay, we have one more thing on the agenda before we have a break, and that's going to be an APSHA budget supplemental request.
take that one. Thank you.
Close out all my stuff here.
Perfect. I can't think without a pen in my hand. A working pen.
Did that thermal bridging analogy help?
Yeah. No, I'm not. I'm going to be really careful with my teapot tonight when I get home.
Cindy Christensen with the Assunpink County Housing Authority. Mike is on vacation. He's in, I don't know if it's sunny California, but that's where he is. I brought with Manny Hernandez, and he's our management analyst in case you have any questions with regards to our database. And this is, the Housing Authority is requesting a supplemental budget which will not affect your budget this year because we have a cash balance that it will take care of. It's how it will affect your subsidy that you provide to the Housing Authority next year. At this point in time, I do not know. I know it will increase, but how much, I'm just not aware of. We are asking for a full-time housing compliance officer. Right now, that job is split between qualifications and compliance. So what this will do is this will create an enforcement, somebody who just oversees our enforcement program. So I'm sure you've known in the press, we've gotten a lot of some positive, some negative press that we haven't been doing enough. We're hoping to ramp that up. We are also working on some additions to our guidelines that we can actually start to hopefully charge fines for people who are out of compliance. And this is something that you guys will obviously see down the line in our guidelines when we go through our policy decisions. Our interim database, and Manny can definitely talk about that. We're working on a full blown-out upgrade of our system so that if you guys have any questions about our inventory, we'll be able to run reports. We'll be able to tell you exactly what's going on with those units. But in the meantime, we're going to have an interim database, and we're hoping to have that ready by the end of July.
End of July is what we're looking at now tentatively. That tentative is because due to technological issues or things we haven't foreseen down the road. So just give you a little bit of background. The original tentative go live we had was the end of May. So you can see that just kind of as things have come up, it's pushed the project back a bit. But it will all be before the end of the year.
So APSHA's also going to be putting out an RFP for a total new data management system.
Yes, we did that earlier, and we only ended up having 2 responses on that. And what we have found, especially on some other people that we talked about, that Mike was concerned that we didn't get more response on that, and he thought that some other groups were going to be turning in responses on that, and they didn't. So he asked them why, and he says there's just so much information, right, that we were asking. It was such an overwhelming type of RFP that we were asking for that we're trying to now to tone it down a little bit and maybe do it in parts. Isn't that right?
Yeah, so what we received from the vendors was that the scope of the original RFP we issued was quite large, and that's one of the reasons why we didn't get too many responses, because many vendors didn't feel that they could meet all of the requirements that we were asking for, so that's why we're looking to piecemeal it. Another avenue that we're looking at is to use BOCC, which the city already has licenses for, and it would just be about adding additional licenses and some more functionality to what we currently have so that we don't have to completely reissue the RFP, that we might be able to knock some of these things out with combining with BOCC and maybe Vertiva.
So will this interim database system, will that help narrow down the focus for an RFP or not?
It's a necessary requirement to get just because of how the processes and information is currently being stored. There's a lot of data cleanup and migration that needs to be done, that if we were to bring on the consultants for them to do that, it would increase the price tag significantly. So with the interim database, I've been working with the city's quality office since October of last year, and like I said, we're looking at about July of this year for the go live on that. So that is a lot of the prep work that we're doing with the interim database is necessary for the long-term one. So it'll be in place until we have the long-term CRM purchased, and then the consultants will come on, take what we have prepared and created from the interim database, and feed that into their long-term solution.
There'll be less stuff that we will have to add when we finally get a final.
Yeah, okay. Rachel?
So just to be clear, this is a little bit of a heads up today as opposed to a request for funds. It is for the enforcement officer kind of heads up. And you're updating us on the database work per George's question and others. And then there's going to be a migration of this interim data to a larger system in the future. So we're not going to really see a lot of duplication or reinventing the wheel. This will be useful to plug in.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, what I'd like to just say is that I think that as we go to the next RFP, if it's in phases or whatever for the final system, I really would like to make sure there's some involvement and review perhaps with the county's IT department as well and our BITS department to make sure that it's more eyes sometimes can see holes or errors or how a system will work out. But I think that that's going to be an important thing for me. It's a shared office. We're both equal partners in it, and we should make sure we're not later hearing, as we know happens in government sometimes, well, they should have done this way, and they never even asked us. So let's make sure we're really fully in the loop to take a look at that. And if you could, what are some of the things that will be in the database, or what are some of the, is it going to be who owns the unit now, what year the deed restriction was issued, an ability to pull that up?
All that
will be in the interim database. And will you guys have to be, or are you already manually entering that off of paper records into this, or how's the interim database being created?
So right now, the big step that we're focusing on is taking all the electronic info that we have and cleaning it up and putting it standardized into the interim database. Down the road, we will be looking at all the paper information that we have and seeing what is pertinent and what we want to keep track of moving forward. So we will be doing manual entry of the paper information down the road, but right now we're more focused on the electronic information.
And eventually what we're hoping is, like for the ownership units, if somebody lives in a Centennial unit and they want to know what their value is, they'll be able to pull up, have some type of a word that they can get into their system. They'll be able to see what their current value is at that point in time. They'll be able to see their deed restriction. They'll be able to go to the HOA and pull up their documents that they have. That's the type of thing that we're working towards, and we want to have pictures. We also would like to have pictures out there too. When we're marketing a unit, we would like to have more pictures of not only the outside but the inside, so people can really see what these units look like.
That was my next question, Cindy, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So,
kind of a Zillow type thing is what Mike kind of sees this,
Rachel,
this as.
Based on your first comment in terms of this being more of a heads up, this is really more than a heads up, John.
What's a heads up for next year?
Well, so maybe I should have jumped in at the beginning to talk a little bit, because I had actually requested the briefing from APSHA, and this falls, I think, a little bit of a gap in our agreement with the city. And so how this works right now is that the under our IGA, APSHA effectively functions as a city department. And so in this case, APSHA brought forward a supplemental request for the items that are in front of you now, but using carry forward dollars. So basically fund balance that was accrued over the previous year. The challenge, of course, is that some of these expenses are an ongoing expense, and so that carry forward will pay for it for a year, but for some of the ongoing expenses, presumably not in future years. And so what I did not want is for APSHA to be in the position of coming in front of you in next year's budget, because I presume that there's going to be some level of increase. And Cindy's right, there's other revenue sources, so we don't know what the exact impact of that is. But I would anticipate that adding the ongoing expenditures will lead to an increase in the request for shared funds from the city and the county in future years, so for the 2018 budget and beyond. And I didn't want APSHA to be in the position of saying, well, that was already approved by one party and not the other. So as a practical matter, you don't have a formal appropriation that you need to make this year, but I do think it's more of that informed consent model where it would be good for APSHA to understand, if the board has serious reservations about approving an ongoing expenditure into the future and possibly an increase for these things in the future, better to know now before the position is hired and we can plan than later. So, George, there isn't a formal action required, but I do think it was worth a conversation given our governance model.
And really, at least from this budget supplemental request, what I see as an ongoing budgetary line item would be an enforcement officer.
Right.
That we would see starting in 2018 as an ongoing.
That's correct. And I think we will also, what you can anticipate, and we don't have a price tag on it because of where we ended up in the RFP process, is that the final data system purchase and implementation will probably have a pretty significant at least one-time price tag. I don't know if there will be additional resources needed to manage. I think that all gets fleshed out in the RFP. But it's a heads up because you guys are going to see, I think, a pretty significant request from APSHA in this coming year, and I thought it was important that we not be left out of the loop before the ball starts rolling.
Yeah. Rachel?
Well, thanks for kind of fleshing out my comment, George. I had read the memo and got that, but you're right, it's more than a heads up. And I just would like to understand, if we were working with the kind of today's number, if it's 125.3, that would be in a future budget split between the city and the county?
Yes.
50-50. So that's about 62.6. But of course, there's inflation, and there's inflation on the other activities of the office. And as John's pointing out, some other capital needs. I have understood that the potential of a computerized, updated, the full system could be, $600,000. Could easily be in that sort of magnitude, and that's not surprising. It's the type of thing we're seeing from leaving the old Eden system in the clerk's office and things like that, moving forward to appropriate software. I think the real challenge is and continues to be that APSHA doesn't really have its own independent funding sources. And through the city, you have the real estate transfer tax and you have the sales tax, and both of those are pretty wide open. They don't have strings attached in the classic sense if it's in furthering the goal of protecting and developing affordable housing, whereas on the county side, this is a general fund issue. And RAFTA does have taxing authority. APSHA.
We do.
And you could go to the voters to ask them to help support these activities. And so, at some level, this starts to compete with any number of other needs in the county general fund, Health and Human Services, and we're standing up a new office for that and taking the steps necessary to kind of comply with higher state standards. So I think it's a good heads up, but, I guess when you do your 10-year plan, you can say, okay, well, this is a new $1 million, over 10 years that will be going to APSHA for these purposes, half of a $600,000 system, So I don't want to pull back from this, but I just want to let you know we don't have the dedicated revenues, and that's the challenge. The other thing I really would like to have a conversation with the board and others in the future about the enforcement issue. I don't want to have seen a few bad apples, let's put it that way, start to have everyone fear their home. What if I got laid off for 2 months? Are they going to come after me? What if my employer just closed the doors and I haven't been able to find something for 4 months? Am I going to lose my home now too? What happens if I'm handicapped at 62 and I can't really work till 68? we've always, and I compliment the housing office on always having a very human element to this. And I, back in the day, sat in on some special review hearings when it was a difficult decision that this person is really not working. This person is really, could be working and they're not. But I'm starting to hear more fear from people who are legitimate, long-term, 15, 20-year owners within the system or renters saying, I'm scared about my home. And is this the first step to try to create turnover, on the smallest infraction? And I think it's very important that that's not the message that's going out from.
And I would totally agree, and that isn't our intent.
Okay.
Our intent is, we really do believe that there are some enforcement issues out there. We do not think it's as rampant as some people think it is.
Right.
This will hopefully bring it in. This will hopefully give a comfort level to somebody who is in a situation like that, where they feel comfortable that they can come in, talk to us and say, I've lost my job, I am looking, or I got hurt, I'm going to be laid up for a couple of months. It's the not knowing part that is hardest for us. And we would prefer people coming in and letting us know that. People can take leave of absences. It's people who leave and then they don't let us know, and then they do it after the fact.
Right.
It's things like that, because a lot of the things that you're covering, I think we have policies and mechanisms already in place to cover a lot of those. It's also getting the word out.
Yeah.
And that's another thing we really want to ramp up as well, is education and what it takes to remain qualified. If something comes up, what you need to do to come in and talk to us so that we are aware of it. Because people do take a leave of absence. We get people who call us up and say, well, so-and-so is not in their unit. Well, we have a list. We tell them they did get an approved leave of absence, so they're fine. So it is something that we know that's out there. But we're hoping that something like this will give us a little bit better handle of how we can take care of instances and how we can receive complaints and really work on the enforcement aspect of it without scaring the people who really, they just have an event that's going on in their life at that point in time.
Okay, thank you for that. I think that's really appropriate. And, one of the things we see more, and again, it comes through human services, is these seasonal closures. We're getting more and more businesses where someone's working full-time, but the business is now closed 4 months a year, and 2 in the fall and 2 in the spring, or something like that. And then how do they make up their hours? You're not going to find part-time work during the off-season when half the businesses are closed, and then to fulfill your hour requirement by the end of the year, are you supposed to work 60 hours a week in the summer? And so we're starting to see changing dynamics in the marketplace itself that may make it very difficult for employees to really, across the board, it's in some specific areas to do that. Thank you.
Just real quick, in light of that conversation that you guys just had, we may see the need for a full-time enforcement officer, hopefully wean, that we don't need to continue this years out. Because I think one of the alarms that's going to go off is, oh my God, they have a full-time enforcement, they're going to come after us. Rather than what you just said, it's a lot about education and just letting people know, come forward, let us know, let us talk. So I think that's something PR-wise we need to get out there when we're saying we're hiring a full-time enforcement officer. We can tag on, this is going to be education into the process of what you need to do to comply and what the variances may be and how you can come forward. Let us know. Let us put you in the system so if we get complaints, we can just resolve them quickly. And that in the future, hopefully it would be nice if we didn't need a full-time enforcement officer. If we got people back into the fold again where people used to be and things have kind of wandered away, and I think we need to bring that back. So I think that's important.
You have to understand that we have also pretty much worked with about the same amount of people in our office, and we have almost 3,000 units now. So we've increased, and we're getting 15 or 16 more through a project that's going to finish the end of August. We've got the city's working on 3 different rental projects. So we have a lot of stuff that's being added into our mix, along with trying to maintain about our same staff as well. So this will help our office area as well.
Right, maybe it won't be so much enforcement, but let's use a softer word like compliance, because enforcement sounds a little strong arm for me.
And one other thing that we're working on is we are updating our website to make it more user-friendly. And we just had a meeting on that today, and we're hoping to go live on that the end of August?
August 24th.
August 24th. With
Perfect.
our new,
Great.
it's going to
Thanks for that
be
information.
it's kind of following along with how you guys did your website. So it's going to make it a lot, we're hoping it's going to be so much more user-friendly.
Perfect. Thank you.
You have time for one more comment, George? Thank you. You know, I'd just like you to carry this message back. It's not, but the other thing that I think we struggle with on the county side is that the housing office is no longer structured to be able to offer us any development assistance in planning future housing. And so we're carrying kind of half the weight of managing what's already there. But when we look at trying to successfully and prudently and efficiently use our mitigation dollars for creation of new units, we don't have that capacity in the county, and we no longer have it in the housing office. And so it's become, you know, we're paying to enforce, and we're maybe paying for the resales, but we're not getting what we most fundamentally need, you know, out of the housing office in terms of how do we develop more housing for the shortfall. And I realize that's just something that's an intergovernmental agreement between the city and county, but it really hinders us. And it's you know, we just heard the presentation about can we move into a regional housing authority, and it's like, wait a second, we're not even able to tap resources in our existing housing authority for the type of production of units that we'd like to see.
One of the things that we do have with you is we do have a management agreement. We are overseeing your units
Rentals.
that you have
I
for
know.
rentals.
Right.
So
And that's
we
great.
are
Thank you.
doing that. So
Yeah, yeah. No, I certainly appreciate that. And for the enforcement and for any public who happens to be watching, since everyone has different deed restrictions, very often when there is a complaint and you investigate, it's actually people complying with their deed restriction.
correct.
And so it's not as if
It's not black and white.
it's not black and white. Thank you for them.
All right, any other questions or
No,
comments?
thanks. This was good information.
Great.
All right, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we're running a little ahead, so maybe we could jump and fill in the gap here. Future agendas.
Yeah, we can go on to future agendas. I just have a few items for you. Last week we had talked about, or we had on your future agendas, the Scott Thompson coming in from the Snowmass Wildcat
Yeah, I
Fire
had that on my.
District. He is actually out of town on the original date, June 27th, so we're going to move that up to June 13th. And I have not had a chance to talk to Scott directly, if that's going to be your question, Patty, as far as...
Why are they coming to us?
Yeah, I believe that they're looking at some district questions that they may need to present to the board, but I have not, like I said, had a chance to talk to Scott
That was
directly
gonna be
about
my
it. Phyllis
question.
had, and she's out of town right now. So just so you know, that'll actually be moved up to accommodate Scott's schedule. Sorry, my iPad just locked out here. And then we had originally had a joint meeting with the Open Space and Trails Board scheduled for June 6th, and we don't have a quorum, as we learned last week, so we have moved that to July 18th. That seemed to work with all the schedules. We got confirmation, George. I wasn't sure if you were available on that date or not, but
Yeah, I'm around.
okay. And then finally, we're starting to set up some joint meetings. The school board actually contacted us and wanted to have a joint meeting. So
Wow.
they were proposing either, and these are both Mondays, they're not on our typical meeting days, either May 22nd or June 12th. Rachel, I believe you're gone May 22nd.
Yes, I am.
But they're looking for availability to meet from 4 to 5 at the school board offices.
What day? I'm sorry.
Either the May 22nd, which Rachel is not available, or June 12th. Both of those should be Mondays.
I'm available on the 22nd.
Yeah, I'll be out of town on the 12th, but I don't need to be there.
Okay.
I mean, one of us is going to miss something, so.
Yeah, if we do the
So
22nd.
the other one was May
22nd.
So we had May 22nd and June 12th.
May 22nd.
There's a raft at 6
I can't
p.m.
make that one either, so.
May 22nd.
Okay, well, maybe we'll go when we have.
Yeah.
What about the June 12th then? Would we have 4 board members available then?
Let's see.
I'm available on the 12th.
I am currently available on the 12th.
Okay. I would suggest choosing a day
Monday.
where we can get the most of you there for the joint meeting.
I'm not sure yet. I'll have to check on it.
Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and tentatively schedule for the 12th?
I think the 12th I think I'm not going to be here.
Oh.
But I maybe can just do a phone call instead of traveling to a meeting, and maybe I can make it work.
Okay.
What are the times that they're proposing?
4 to 5 at this.
I could be here for that on the 12th.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, why don't, it sounds like possibly, well, 3, possibly 4 of you on the 12th.
I'm gonna pencil you in.
Definitely only 3 on the 22nd. So we'll go ahead and go with the 12th.
Okay. And
Do you have any idea what they want to be discussing with us
The
about?
contact actually came through Susan, so
Okay.
I'll hopefully be visiting with
Feel
John
it.
Malloy. But we've had a number of partnership discussions lately, and I think it'll probably be a touch base on those.
Like housing kind of partnerships? Or
No,
just-
no, things, where they're looking at some of their facilities, master planning. We also have the school resource center that we've stood up jointly.
Or the bus barn?
We have the mental health planning task force that we've both been participating in. So I'd imagine it's along
I was
those
just going to say, let's just make sure we have some prep for that meeting built into prior work
Okay.
sessions.
Yeah, good.
And that's all I've got on future agenda.
Do you want a real future agenda? I will be out of town from July 27th to August 6th.
22nd?
July 27th.
Oh, 27th.
And Steve, that means I will not be able to attend the Northwest COG meeting in Granby,
On which date now?
July 27th. I don't remember what their date is. I think their date is the 27th,
I'd be
actually.
glad to go to Granby.
Granby's fun. So I'll keep Steve in the loop on that, so if he wants to attend that meeting in my stead, we'll have the information sent on to Steve.
Okay. Anybody else?
They're working on the roof today?
John?
So,
Yeah, it's the 27th.
I don't have anything else,
I don't have
no.
time.
I'll be out on June 13th.
Patty will be chairing again.
Oh, June 13th? Oh my gosh, I gotta plan ahead.
okay.
Okay, so that's it.
And I will not be here. We already canceled the week of the CCI, so
Yeah.
never mind, sorry.
All right, so that's it for future agendas. Let's see, where are we at here?
I had a EOTC meeting somehow penciled in on June 13th. That's
I
not
have an
true.
EOTC on the 15th
Oh.
penciled in for,
Do we know anything about that?
which is a Thursday. Thursdays are.
That would
the
have been, that would make more
I
sense.
got it the
June
15th.
15th, yeah. We have an EOTC meeting.
We'll have to double. That may have been our meeting dates that we agreed to at the beginning of the year, but as we know, sometimes those
Oh, okay.
get
Well, let's
changed.
double check on that. that'd be-
Okay. You want to do a little open discussion?
Yeah, we can certainly do a little bit of open discussion. I know Gary's going to be coming in a little bit later today. I had 2 items on there. We had the legislative update. An item that I did not have on that maybe we can address now was just to bring back the Mine Springs request a little bit and have a conversation with the board to try and either hone in on an option or get direction on how you'd like to respond to that request. And the board may recall that Mine Springs came in and had requested $100,000 towards a capital campaign for construction of a new mental health hospital down in Grand Junction. Patty, I know you had
toured
a
the
chance
facility.
to go down and tour. I believe their fundraising goal right now is that 46 million is what they had represented to us. They are asking all the counties in their service area to participate. I don't know that they've gone to municipalities. They're also talking to hospitals. I know AVH will be considering a request at their next board meeting. At any rate, in tracking with, or trying to track with, kind of what I heard the board's interests or concerns were, I thought I'd throw out some options and see if any were kind of in concert, where a majority of you were. First, I heard some interest in having a portion of any funds that would be committed geared towards matching or incentivizing other entities, maybe other counties or municipalities, to participate in capital funding. I also heard concern about the overall amount that was requested and possibly looking at something, but maybe something less than the 100,000 that was requested. There's a number of ways that the board could approach this. One way would be to go ahead and quite simply in a 1-year period appropriate funds. And this is again to get the temperature of the board, but say between $50,000 to $75,000, with half of those funds to be committed up front and half to be used as matching if other political subdivisions within the Mine Springs service area, so whether that be Eagle County or Rio Blanco County or Mesa County, comes up with funding that we would match that to incentivize participation that maybe isn't there right now. So, whether that be 25,000 in matching or 36.5 or whatever half of that final amount that the board would be comfortable with would be one way to maybe meet some of the interests that at least I thought I heard in the conversation that day. Another, would be to spread out the commitment over a number of years, if that would make the board more comfortable. But I wanted to bring back to the board to kind of, bring that conversation back and see if we could get some direction for staff to nail down
Rachel?
Yeah, thanks. I missed the work session presentation again, testifying. Thank God the legislative session ends tomorrow. Similar to Patty, I did tour the facilities one of the last times I was in Grand Junction for a Club 20 meeting and heard their kind of presentation there, so I'm pretty familiar with it. And I'll just say my overall impression. And one, I don't like the idea of kind of doing the matching thing, because they are pushing everyone as hard as they can now, and there's other communities that have already committed and put money in, and so are we matching Garfield County's 50,000 that they already put in, or are we putting in our money and asking somebody else to match? And I think it kind of creates new hurdles for the fundraisers to say that, well, we have strings attached and you may have these dollars, but we may not give you those dollars. And, who do we match? What if it's a private donor who, I think it's too confusing. The second is that I would like to do pretty much the full amount that they had requested of the 100,000. And what I understood from their presentation is that they can take it over a 3-year period, so it would be 33,000 a year. And I come back to, I think they were trying to have as much pledged as possible to do a July or this summer groundbreaking, if I remember correctly.
First phase.
And one of their large contributions, whether it's the Gates or the Bachelor, one of the foundations, is premised on them kind of closing the deal by the July date and having enough to go forward at that point. So to me, it reminds me a little bit of the Aspen Recreation Center when the private fundraising was there and whether or not they're going to go forward with it or could finish the project. My logic is several-fold. One of the major components is adding enough room and capacity for adolescents and young people. And, we're contributing to organizations like the Hope Center to try to prevent suicides between anyone in our population, but particularly young people. If someone is having a mental health episode of some sort and there's no beds, they either end up staying in jail or they're sent down to the Front Range, and then the distance between their family, and that's only if there's rooms available on the Front Range. There's only one other overnight in thing there. To me, this is about our sheriff's office, and this is about the treatment of people who we know have mental illness. And there are just, I believe, liabilities of having law enforcement without that type of psychiatric training, trying to deal with someone in their incarceration and having no place to take them and having no place to get them the appropriate treatment over time. And so I just see this literally as an adjunct who works with us over these types of issues. And, my son actually worked there for a period of time, probably 6 or more years ago. It's been quite a while, and they have new management, and it's changed tremendously since then. But he told me of talking with a young person who was like 14 who tried to commit suicide, and that he was able to say from his personal experience, it's not the end of the world. Things get better, as tough as they are. But what is 1 or 2 lives worth? And the anguish in the families, and this to me is almost like us standing up our detox center here instead of having people in the jail and our jailers trying to deal with people who were obviously under the influence of something in an extreme manner. So I don't like to be casual with money, but this is an investment. And, thinking way back, I think a little before your time even, John, I think we contributed close to $75,000 to the thrift shop for the construction of the new thrift shop, because we saw that as just helping our community so much and being an asset to our community and how much it returned back to our community. I don't think we can talk nationally about the high rate of mentally ill in prisons and in jails without saying, well, where are they going to get treatment? I don't think we can talk about suicide prevention and drug addiction and things like that without also realizing that sometimes people need overnight stays and committed stays beyond the drying out. After the drying out, very many substance abusers are actually dealing with underlying mental health issues. And we're the West Slope. We need to act regionally. I think it's good to have that sort of example. And I think that, as I understand it, Garfield County has already committed $50,000. And when I saw John Martin before, he said, well, yeah, we've given $50,000 and we may give more if they come back. So I just think we should go the whole distance.
Well, first of all, their total is $46 million. This is just a first phase. I don't know what's going to happen. They're doing it incrementally. It's a lot of money to raise. They will be back asking us for more, and I don't know what all is included in the first phase. I don't know where adolescents fall in, how many beds they're bringing in, or if they're just creating more safety issues. Because they have a lot of safety issues there, line of sight issues with keeping an eye on things. So I'm just concerned as what are we getting? What's happening with this first 100,000? Because I can't remember, John, the phasing and the doubling of beds, or is it just not a doubling of beds, just making the current beds nicer, so we're not really getting more beds?
My understanding of their request, Patty, was for the entirety of the project, and so the $46 million. They're way short of that. And $46 million. They've got a lot of fundraising to do still, but my understanding was, they're coming to us for the entirety of the project.
But the break ground in July is what, $6 million or something? I mean, it's
and I don't have the phases right in front of me right now.
It's not a lot when you're looking at the $40 million. So they're hitting a lot of the big guys now. I'm concerned at the grandioseness of this plan, and I don't want to get them started and really get them nowhere.
Yeah.
I want to hear from other people.
Okay. I didn't know they were
clarifying.
Wait, you didn't know they were phasing?
No. Just one small thing. I was not under the impression that it was an entire pay now capital, that they'll be able to carry some of the expense of the hospital and the construction onward like a mortgage.
That's correct. They're going to be financing some of it.
All 46 million in the bank. They need a certain amount to make the pro forma work to have the normal expenses pay off like a mortgage.
That's not what I read in that.
I'll see what
They
I can
did
pull
say
up
they're
on
going
that, sir.
to, that whole additional part, they said they're going to finance that. It's not,
Yeah.
they're not asking for money for that second part.
If this facility was in Pickens County, it would make a lot of sense. But this is a Western Slope facility, and I mentioned this at that meeting. I don't see that Pickens County should be taking the lead on this. We should be an active participant and partner, but with a population base of 17,000 only versus the population base of Eagle, which is over 50, Garfield, which is over 50,000 people. I don't know the population of Mesa. I think we should be a major player, but I don't see us having to come up with $100,000. I think we could show that we're very supportive. I think 50,000 is a good number. Mm-hmm. I think that a matching fund does work when you're going out for additional monies. We see that all the time with the Healthy Community Fund. All those organizations, they depend on the monies that we provide them, as small as it is, because then they're able to leverage that in for matching funds and show that support. When we look at Eagle County at this point committing to $10,000 with a population base of 50,000 people, I think a matching fund hopefully would incentivize them to up their commitment. Same with Routt County. So I would suggest 25,000 or 30,000 a commitment, and then up to the remainder up to 50 to try to encourage a matching fund. We haven't heard from the city of Aspen. We haven't heard from the town of Snowmass Village. I think we could be a leader in terms of trying to generate additional dollars through that mechanism.
I agree.
And if I could, just because the facts may help the board a little bit, we're all way off on our numbers. The total amount for the fundraising campaign is $34 million.
You said 50.
I did, and they are fundraising. So the total project's $34 million. Their fundraising goal is $17.75 million.
By July.
As of March 30th, they had raised $10.2 million of that, and so they are, they are on their way. So that gap is not as big.
They're looking at fundraise financing about half.
Yeah, exactly.
So I
apologize having those mixed up.
Thank you for the clarification. I think, George, you're right. And it's not, even if it's just maybe not matching, but I don't know. It's a tough one, Rachel. Like Rachel said, with our human health, our nonprofit grants, we say this just shows that Pickens County is involved. It's not necessarily matching all the time, but I think 50,000 is a good place. And in a year or two or three, when they come back and say, "Look at how far we've gone. We need this much to kick us over," we can reconsider again at that time. It's not like we're closing the door, saying 100,000 now. That's all you get. We say 50,000 now, and let's see how things go, because it's going to be a long process. They have huge plans for this facility.
And I know where it's a 63,000 square foot facility, 48 beds,
at the end of the
as
day,
well as a dedicated unit for child and adolescent treatment.
Steve?
Yeah, I agree with you, George, on the disparity between the population numbers and the ask they were doing to the different counties, and it's almost like they came to us because Aspen's a wealthy community, in spite of the fact that 25% of our people are, basically living at the poverty level. The figure that I would love to see before we decide on a figure is how much money are we going to save our jail? And if there's any way we could estimate what it costs when we do have a person with mental health problems who doesn't need to be in jail, they need to be in the facility in Grand Junction. And if we could look at it that way.
Steve, I did talk to Don Bird about that, and they were having a hard time in some ways parsing out, what it wouldn't necessarily be savings, right? Because the costs, we're not adding a jailer. We're not adding, those food costs or what have you. That's already kind of sunk. What the issue is the appropriateness of treatment, that our jail is not a place that can treat a mental health crisis in an appropriate or effective way. And so, by incarcerating them, we're protecting the safety of the public and that person for the time that they're in our facility, but we're not providing any help to, ensure their safety or the community safety once they're out. And so the cost, I think that was the challenge. Greg was asking the same question yesterday when we met, and the challenge is it's not about the cost savings, it's about the appropriateness. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with the 50, because we need to.
Greg, we haven't heard from
Just
you.
wanted to bring up on the appropriateness that I understand that the first thing you'll hear from the sheriff or the jailer is that 70% of the people incarcerated at the jail currently have a mental health issue. I think that's the number I heard. Mm-hmm. The question is, will this facility be able to help them? They're not going to be able to help them while they're serving a term or while they're incarcerated. They only can help them after they're released. I don't get the impression this place will be
here's the other complicated part of that, is that the hospital, the mental health hospital, is dealing with a certain level of acuity of mental health crisis. And so particularly as it relates to our jail, those that are in such a crisis that they can be involuntarily held for their mental health issue. It's called an M1 hold. That's typically what goes to the mental health hospital. Okay. A lot of the folks that also would benefit from treatment, mental health treatment and such, haven't reached that level of acuity, but require maybe more outpatient kind of services and such. In that case, under the right circumstances, those can be delivered in the jail. We've been working with providers to do a better job there, and Don did say we're getting a better response, particularly on those outpatient services from Mine Springs to assist with that population. So it's not that whole 30%. Last year we had about 14 Pickens County residents who were on involuntary holds in the hospital, and they did not have other payment sources for that. Would that number go up with this facility? I suspect so. I think comes out of beds, and we're looking for other places staying in our jail. Sometimes the front facility opens up, but the response time is rarely in line with the acuity of the mental health issue, I think, is the problem. And so that's the challenge. Is there's a whole, I think, spectrum, Greg, that these folks fall on, and not all of them should or would be treated in the hospital.
Right. Okay. I think just to weigh in on it, I'm comfortable with like a $50,000 grant. Mm-hmm. I do like the idea of matching funds, but maybe we have to ask them, as you said, if somebody's already done this and they consider that we're matching someone else already, that doesn't work, but that's something they can help it.
I think we could establish funds committed after a certain date or what have you, and try and, to Rachel's point, I think for our sake too, we'd want it to be simple, but also an incentive.
With that.
Yeah.
I think that if 50 is the number, fine. I would probably be willing to go up a little bit from that, only because I think it's an important problem, and I'm not sure any of the communities are contributing enough to this particular, place and this issue. So
I think I'm hearing. Oh, sorry, Rachel.
Yeah, let me make a last pitch. First, by saying, it's very hard to compare county to county because they're not all apples to apples. If you're taking Routt County right now, they have lost so much business through the shutdown of coal and the loss of severance taxes and things that we haven't been facing. So they are facing really, really bad budget issues in those areas. And other areas that are more extractive industry taken down. I would be more comfortable if we put a 50,000 grant in to begin with, maybe the 25,000 as a match. I think it's important to be leaders, and you can kind of pull people along by that as well. I'm really disappointed to hear about what you said with Eagle. I was unaware of that, and so I fully understand where you're coming from there. But you look at something like Eagle, they're the only ones who built a new assisted living facility for seniors in our region in quite a while, and we haven't embarked on that. That's part of the debt load that they're carrying. So again, it gets really hard to say apples to apples to apples about who invests in what and when. I personally, we all read the paper a lot and everything, but when you talk to other commissioners and the lawsuits they're now facing in Jefferson County because of suicides in the jail, things like that they really weren't able to take care of these people properly, let alone the feeling of could we have prevented a suicide in the jail. I feel we've dodged bullets, frankly, for a long time, and we've been fortunate. And maybe that does affect the staffing levels, that we're staffing up to make sure we can have an eye on everybody all the time, because we know that over 50% of the people in our jail have mental health issues. So, you know, as a state, when we've had things like the Aurora Theater shooting or Columbine or things like that, or the amount of money which we actually have taken on, and we take on a lot. I'm not trying to disparage Pickens County, and I understand, again, the desire to see others doing more, but we've committed to about an extra $130,000 a year in payments to try to set up the Mountain Family Health Facility in Basalt. And some of that is mental health counseling rooms, and they're going to find somebody who needs treatment, and then we're going to say, well, there's no bed to send you to. There's nowhere to send you to yet, you know. And so I am concerned about them missing and then losing their larger grant, and I just I think I think we can afford it. So I really appreciate consideration of go 50,000 as a grant and 25,000 as a matching.
I'm going to stick with the 50,000. There's no guarantee we're going to get those beds. They could all be coming from Routt County or Eagle County. I mean, we're not buying beds, you know, and the improvement, the expansion of these beds is years down the line, which would give us another opportunity to fund more in the future. I think we start out with the 50,000. I don't think we need to really gauge it on anything. Let's just grant them a $50,000 contribution now, and then we'll see how their fundraising goes on in the future and where their next phases go, because it's going to be a while till these current beds are increased till we see it, and let's just see how it moves along.
So if we want to keep it simple and we want to be a leader, I think 50,000 speaks very loudly coming from Pickens County. Steve?
I could see a tentative promise in the future when they're doing the next phase of the building project that come back to us and we'll see what we could do then.
You may have a different board by then, so there's no guarantee. I wouldn't.
But I agree. If we did 50,000 and Eagles only put in 10,000, that's going to inspire them to step up to the plate a little more. And just knowing their board, their hearts are in the right place, and if their budget works on it, I think they would put in more. And
I would say 50 with an invitation to come back as it moves on. It could be a different board, but you know,
I think we
want to
can
hear
move it
from
forward
them
in the future if we are seeing that, you know, they're moving it along.
So 50,000, no match, just 50,000, and then if there's a opportunity for last dollar in, we may consider additional
have them come back
in the future.
Okay.
But we need to really take a 15-minute break.
All right.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
I definitely
15-minute break, so what's that? That puts us at, I don't know, 3:40?
Okay. Sorry, we'll be a little late.
No, these guys aren't up.
No, but we have a...
We had the interview.
Kind folks of old, you come again no more. Home was home then, my dear, full of kindly faces. Home was home then, my dear, happy for the child. Fire and the windows bright glittered on the moorland. Song, tuneful song, built a palace in the wild. Now when day dawns on the brow of the moorland, lone stands the house and the chimney stone is cold. Lone, let it stand now, the friends are all departed. The kind hearts, the true hearts that loved the place of old. Spring shall come again, calling up the moorfowl. Spring shall bring the sun and rain, bring the bees and flowers. Red shall the heather bloom over hill and valley. Soft flow the stream through the even flowing hours. Fair the day shine as it shone on my childhood. Fair shine the day on the house with open door. Birds come and cry there and twitter in the chimney, but I go forever and come again no more.
going to move on to our citizen board interview. Christy Blish is here for the Weed Advisory Board. So welcome and thank you for applying.
We are excited.
Another weed puller. Have you served on any boards in the county boards in the past?
No. I retired only about a year ago, and so I was one of those corporate chicks working 24/7, traveling, trying to get in and out of Aspen Airport every Monday and coming back Thursday. So
Wow.
I'm just newly retired and really excited about it. I'm a volunteer forest ranger. And I'm signing up with English in Action and a couple of other things, but I wanted to take it easy doing volunteer work because I wanted to enjoy my retirement. Then I heard about this, and I spend a huge amount of my own time eradicating weeds on the 35 acres that we have, and I really believe in it. I get really passionate about it, and I'm heaving 39-gallon cans of garbage cans with bags in them, around my back. And I think it's really an important thing. And then when I heard about this board, first of all, I didn't even know there was a board, and then that they would welcome a citizen member, I thought, this is too good to be true, because I think that, as even my husband and my neighbors would say, people are totally uneducated about it. They go, oh, isn't that a pretty little purple, is that thistle or something? It's so pretty little purple. And I think that there's a huge amount of education and inspiration that needs to be done because it's just getting worse. So that's my story.
Oh, good. Well, thank you, Patty.
Well, I've heard through the rumor mill that you've already attended a meeting.
Yes, I did, and I've been the enthusiastic editor of that first ad for the Weed of the Month, and I kind of jumped in with all fours. And even if I'm not a part of the board, I want to help out. And,
I think it's great. I talked to Melissa yesterday. I saw her at the landfill, and she was very excited because she was raving about your credentials, which I think are great, and I think it'll be fun. Steve and I both sat on the board previously.
Okay.
It's a great group, and, people go, you're on the what board? I'm on the noxious weed board. You have to clarify noxious weed, because if you just say on your weed board, people get confused.
Right. Oh, right. Which
weed board are you on?
Oh, because marijuana, I guess? Oh, that's right. I hadn't thought about that. Oh, my gosh. I will be sure to use the word noxious.
Noxious weed board.
Yeah.
So great. Thank you very much for applying. We really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome.
Steve?
I was wondering what weeds you are attacking on your own property, because some people can think any weed that they don't, or any plant they don't like, they call a weed. But then the noxious weeds are very specific species that are not native to our area, and they're highly invasive, or they have really bad characteristics that make them highly
and then there's
undesirable.
level A's and level B's, and I'm still learning
just
about
out of
this.
curiosity, what species are you familiar with from your own
Old
property?
thistle, honey. Oh my gosh, some of it's growing like 6 feet tall if I find new pods of them, in the 35 acres. The mullein, I think the mullen's only a level B, but those are those skinny guys that kind of look like cactus, but they grow up this high, and they have like 10 million seeds that last for 80 years, and it's just, and they sprout up and they just blanket the earth. And the scentless chamomile, those are like the little white daisies, and they're so pretty. And I let them spread all around my house. And a landscaper friend came. This is like about 12 years ago, and I said, "Look at this! Isn't this great? These daisies are growing up. They're so cute." And I said, "They're spreading so fast. It's wonderful." And he goes, "Take those out." And so sure enough, they start creating carpets. So it's the more basic stuff. The myrtle is the big one coming up, but I don't have that in my land.
Well, when I was on the Weed Advisory Board, which I served on for about 10 years, I did a lot of weed walks in people's yards, because people would ask for help. They wanted to learn, and that was really the job of the weed board, was education.
Yeah.
Giving people information. And I typically would find at least 7 noxious weeds on someone's property, and I could probably find 7 on yours.
Good. Come on over, honey. I'm sure.
You learn a lot being on the Weed Advisory Board.
I can count probably 5 on my little parcel with the trailer court.
Yeah. And now, are you aware of the Arbor Day thing on Saturday where the Weed Advisory Board is going to have a booth there?
Yes, I know.
At
Melissa
the
sent out the email, and my husband and I are launching off on a big RV camper trip tomorrow morning at dawn, and unfortunately we're going to be gone over the weekend because I would have totally done that. In my past corporate life, I worked for high-tech companies, and we would typically have booths at conventions. I am really good at conventions, pulling them off the floor going, hey, you know, have you heard about this? So I'm hoping that maybe I can serve at the Saturday markets. I think we're going to have a table up there.
Great.
And probably the only one we're not going to do is Dandelion Days. That's a
this
joke.
weekend, too.
That's this week,
but
yeah, that's
anyway.
Saturday also, yeah.
But I do have a lot more to learn about weeds for sure. I'm just a babe in the woods, literally and figuratively, and Melissa gave me all these books and stuff, so.
So, one more point, George. Going technically by the guidelines on the board, there are 2 vacancies for a resident of Snowmass Village. But Melissa Sever is recommending to ignore that right now because we've been looking for people to volunteer to be on this board for so long, and it was finally we're getting some people coming and being interested in it, and so having a warm body, even if you don't live in Snowmass Village, I think would be important to the board to
I can sort of see.
have more new energy and new ideas, and all of that is really important.
Sure, good. I can see Snowmass from my window.
Greg, then Rachel?
I just wanted to ask a quick question. You're a volunteer forest ranger. Where were you on the Forest Conservancy? Where were you doing that?
Oh, White River National Forest.
So, stationed in any particular place or a road?
Oh, I'd like to say we don't carry heat and we're not stationed per se. The way Marcia Johnston runs it is that we can pick any trail that we want to patrol and let loose. So you know, Avalanche Creek and Electric Pass. I mean, we can go any Conundrum, of course, which is the one that's been on the news so much. But it's basically for us, for the volunteers, it's for people who love to patrol but want to take an educational role with the visitors to the White River National Forest. And so, Savage, Mormon, I mean, wherever I want to hike, first of all, you take a lot of classes so you know what you're talking about, because the minute you put on a uniform, everybody and their brother has a question for you, so we need to be informed, and we have a lot of important jobs. I could go into that, but I won't.
Confederates are at the Maroon Bells all summer too, right?
Yes, absolutely. And each one of us has to man the Maroon Bells at least twice a summer to meet all the busloads of the hordes of enthusiastic tourists.
That. That's really a valuable, important job for the community, and it's great. I really enjoy meeting the people. When I ride my bike up there, I talk to the rangers, and it's so much fun to meet the people.
Yeah.
So thank you for participating in that as well. Looking forward to having you, join us here. I'm hoping that things work out.
She works with Peggy Jo and Mary Tippett. And
all those great gals. It's such a great organization. It's not dissimilar from this board because it's about education and people taking action to better the land.
Rachel?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Christy, for applying, and I'm sure that you will come up to speed, as it were, on the weed issues very, very quickly. And so I'm really happy you've applied. I don't have any tough questions for you. You're going to be a great member. I was going to mention that I've just seen that they've created a new app for people with smartphones that's called PlantNet. And you take a picture of the plant or the stem or the flower, and it can identify up to 10,000 different species of plants. Whoa. And so I think that's going to be a really pretty cool tool going forward. I don't know if they have a noxious weeds section, but that could be really helpful. Yeah. And so again,
that's great.
Thank you for applying.
Thanks, Christy. We should be able to get back to you pretty shortly.
Okay, great.
Really nice.
How will I hear? Will you guys send
have
an
a
email?
safe weekend in your RV. Have fun.
Send a letter. Right?
Yeah, we'll send a letter.
Question: how did you first hear about the weed board? Did you go attend a meeting? Is that what you said?
No. My husband and I were cruising the Picken County website for some news on a neighborhood situation, and he yells out from his easy chair, "Oh my God, they need somebody at the Noxious Weed Advisory Board. This is perfect for you." And so it was just us tripping through, but it was meant to be.
Thanks for applying.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you for your time.
Let's see, we're going to have a Carbondale to Crested Butte Trail update.
Hello
I
all.
was already out there riding it last week, and it was a great trail. Thank you.
You're welcome. So, why we're here is that...
Who are we?
I am Gary Tenenbaum. I'm the Director of Picken County Open Space and Trails.
I'm Lindsay Etter. I'm the Planning and Outreach Manager for Picken County Open Space and Trails.
And why we're here is to give you guys kind of an update of where we're at with the trail. I know you're reading a lot in the newspapers, and there's a lot of talk about it, but we want to give you from staff perspective, since you guys gave us direction to go forward and start this big, huge planning process, that we want to keep you guys up to date on where we're at. And so Lindsay will give you kind of an update on the process and where we're going.
So, just to recap a little bit, we kicked off the year with an outreach that was about 6 weeks long, gathering input from the public, mainly focused on what would be a successful trail, including, what are concerns people have, what information would they like gathered in order to make an informed decision later. But it was high-level discussion on, the big picture of the trail. So then right now we are currently in the data collection phase. So we have hired 2 consultants. One is ERO, they're our environmental consultant, so they're focused on gathering all the different natural resource data. And then we also have Loris Associates, who is the engineer, and they're doing engineering feasibility. In addition to them, we have had SGM out in the field looking at the right-of-way, the highway right-of-way, so that there were mainly sections lower down that were not, the right-of-way was not mapped. So SGM has been focusing on mapping that and then giving that data to Loris so that they can use that as part of their feasibility analysis. So right now, both of ERO and Loris are gathering and doing all the work they can, gathering data, doing as much as they can in the office, and then the plan is to be in the field in the middle of June. Next week, we're meeting with the Forest Service and local CPW staff to kind of touch base and make sure we're all on the same page, and going to end up with information that everyone will be happy with. And then looking to the future of this year for planning, the plan is that we will go back to the public again in August and September, looking at all the data we've gathered around all the different segments, and then bring back a draft plan to both boards at the joint meeting in the fall, which will then go out for public comment again, and then bring back the final plan for both boards at the joint meeting in December. So the goal is by the end of the year to have a preferred route through all the different planning and outreach that we have going on. What else? We've been working with the GMUG, so the Grand Mesa Compadre Gunnison National Forest, and the representative out of Paonia. They're in a little bit different place because they already had the trail in their travel management plan. So they're looking at laying the segments out on the ground and what portions of it that they can do in-house as far as the field work, and then we can help supplement that when needed. But they're coming over and are part of our kickoff meeting next week here. What else? We're going to go to Jeffco in May, so open space staff is going to go to Jefferson County and meet with Jefferson County staff because they've been working on the Clear Creek Trail. And so we want to go and learn as much as we can from what's worked and what hasn't worked, what are the lessons they've learned, because it's a very similar trail project in that it's a narrow canyon, the same sort of diversity of land use and different habitats. There's a lot of comparable situations. So we're going to go and meet with them and pick their brains on what we can learn. And so I think those were the big highlights as far as what we have going on right now. So the next round of public outreach isn't until late summer. So right now we're just focusing everything on gathering as much information as we can.
And just to give an update, when she said joint meeting, you know, you guys do quarterly joint meetings with the Open Space and Trails Board. This project is so big that we want to make sure that the public can come to both boards at once, so it's not kind of disjunct. So you have the Open Space Board making recommendations and then having another public meeting. Since this project is so large and there is going to be a lot of public involvement, I think it'll be a lot easier if we try to do it at our joint meetings so everyone can listen to the public comments, everyone can get it at the same time. It will be televised too if we do it with the Board of County Commissioners. So that's one of the big pieces going forward, is trying to time it. So it might change our joint meeting schedule a little bit. In July, we're going to have a joint meeting. We usually have them in June, and then we'll probably do another one in October. So it's going to change it a little bit, but that's one of the big changes that you will see, is trying to, on such a large project, to make sure that everyone gets a chance to talk to both boards at once, because this project is just larger than most of the things that we do.
Good, thanks. Questions or comments, Rachel?
Yeah, I think that sounds great, and I really appreciate the outreach you're doing. And as it is often said, you know, I just want to take this nice and slow and make sure we're covering all the bases, and there's nothing rushed here. And along those veins, it might be worth considering whether we could have a meeting further down valley and close to the trail. We've done joint meetings, say, with Carbondale in the past that were helpful about common issues, or we've had meetings in other areas. But I think, you know, maybe looking to the October meeting or something like that, it would make sense. So that's just my kind of thought on it.
We want to broadcast, so.
I know, but it still makes it a lot harder for people to travel up here who'd like to make comments to us. And so I'd just like to.
Well, it's a good idea. In fact, it may work out that we could also have a joint meeting with the town of Carbondale.
Yeah. So I just want to kind of throw that out there.
Town of Carbondale broadcast.
Yeah.
So that's a good idea. That may be an opportunity down valley and share some thoughts with the town of Carbondale.
Sure.
Yeah, good idea, Rachel.
That's a great idea, and so I'll work with John and the town of Carbondale. We'll see what could work.
Yeah.
It'd be great to broadcast from there. I think that's a
and
good
it's
idea.
plenty of time, so
yeah,
it's
right.
good.
Yeah, it's not
Perfect.
the July
Great.
meeting, so we don't.
Okay, anything else? Steve?
Well, we've all been getting lots of emails, and you probably have been too. There's, you know, and we know there's a huge amount of public interest on this. So, for sure, we want to do this right and take our time and listen to everybody's concerns and try to come up with the best possible alignment.
Well, and one of the goals is to be as transparent as possible, and that's why we're going to keep coming to the Board of County Commissioners and to the Open Space Board with these updates to just make sure that this is from Pitkin County, this is what we're doing. So people don't get trying to understand what we're doing, where we're at. We're trying to be as transparent as we could possibly be, and we are getting a lot of comments, and there's a lot of interest in this, and we will be receptive to it all, and we'll work through it, and it's going to, you know, hopefully we can get to a decision point in December, but we're basically giving it a whole year to make a decision on this.
Rachel?
Just one last comment. Again, I believe you're doing an excellent job, but just don't forget about the potential of writing free letters to the editor to update the public. You know, as you can see today, we don't have any of the press in here watching us. You know, if somebody tunes in at this little part of the meeting, they'd get the update, but otherwise not. So take advantage of being able to submit free letters and things like that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Greg?
I just took a tour with Gary. Was it on Friday? And very informative. Got to look at a lot of places that I'd wondered about and have heard so much about. And I would recommend it to anyone. And I'd like to see that become more available to the public as well as other commissioners. You've probably already done this. If you haven't lately, it's just interesting to go look at it firsthand. But I'm thinking if people in the public are interested, will they have the ability to do a similar tour at some point with open space guides?
We could look at that. We've been debating the best, because it's a huge project area, the best way to try to reach the most people with the amount of information we have. So we've been discussing maybe doing a video that kind of walks people through as well. But we could do that as well, offer tour days. That could be
The video
that
would be great, too.
Yeah, the only problem with the tour days is it becomes really difficult to coordinate because of how, imagine if we had 30 of us or 40 of us on that tour. So I think we can come up with something that works to get people out there on the alignments that are potential on there. So I think in August is going to be really the next public process piece, so we could really try it. And yeah, definitely if any BOCC want to see it, let us know, and we're happy to take you guys out there.
All right, great. Well,
Thanks,
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So let's go back to open discussion. John, can we do some board appointments, perhaps?
So if I could, because I think Kathy Chandler was going to come up for those, so maybe if we could do a legislative update, and maybe she will be here. I shot her an email that we're running a little early.
This is a legislative update. I think we all got the thing from Nate today at Northwest COG. Did you guys get it about Senate Bill 306? It's the broadband bill. Yeah, and it's a last-minute broadband. Oh, tomorrow's the last day, so we couldn't even get a letter over to him now anyway. Any suggestions on what we can do to support this?
Yeah, I received an email earlier this morning from Eric Bergman with CCI. They're tracking it. The essence of the bill was that it would transfer money from the high-cost fund for telephone service to broadband deployment fund.
For the long bill.
And then it was amended to reinsert some of the industry standards and conditions that we all objected to last year. Last year's bill was to kind of get rid of that Senate Bill 152. Carrie Donovan was carrying it, and industry just started saddling it up with a whole new set of requirements. So just today, they amended it to include those sort of industry-generated requirements. And so CCI staff and others were going to fight those requirements and say, come on, let's just keep it simple, move more of this money into the broadband deployment. I understand it's being fought very heavily by CenturyLink and AT&T because that's money they get for phone service. And I did email Kara earlier today a couple times to say, what do you think of this? It's going really fast, the last 2 days. And so without really hearing anything back and just going off prior information and knowledge, I did email Carrie Donovan directly. The vote will be in the Senate to say we'd like to see the money moved into the broadband deployment fund without these amendments. That industry has had 10 years to respond to our needs. So I did let her know where we're standing, and that really came from a call from Eric Bergman saying, hey, got to reach out to your senators.
Northwest Cognate's supporting it too with that same caveat, so thank you for doing that. That's all. I really wanted to just get that off my email.
Good.
I just sent it to you,
Yeah.
Steve.
Did you have specifics you were going to update?
I can. My information might be old. Kara's out of town, so that's yeah.
It's okay. Yeah,
I know. Steve, I was going to ask you on the energy-related issues. I know we passed state Senate appropriations on May 5th, but CC4CA was taking a position on that. I don't know if you'd be able to share. Where's CC4CA is?
Oh, which bill number?
I want to say Senate Bill 301.
301?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I got an update from Cindy Hubin.
So 301 is, these numbers run around in my head, but that's, I'm trying to get my hooks in to describe it. My gut feeling is that bill is probably going to die because
today and tomorrow.
It probably will pass the Senate, but it's probably going to die in the House. It has to do with a funding mechanism for the Colorado Energy Office.
Right.
Oh,
But basically, it guts a whole lot of the different parts of the renewable energy and energy efficiency parts of the Colorado Energy Office. Many of them programs that have been underutilized or maybe not utilized at all. So there probably are some good parts of the bill. But basically it is, the gist of it is converting the Colorado Energy Office into more of a fossil fuel industry energy office and not a renewable energy office. So the Energy Office has some funding, federal funding, but they might lose that funding without getting some money from the state, like for matching funds and that sort of thing. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. This bill has some good points. I don't think it's probably going to pass. The Energy Office can continue for a while next year without having it pass, but they need a good stable source of funding and direction in order to still be focused more on renewable energy and energy efficiency.
Yeah,
Rachel?
I think, yeah, I pulled over here a little more. Steve has described that fairly well. It seems to be a little bit of one of those shoot the puppy dog negotiation in the last week. And as it came and was introduced by Senator Scott from the Mesa County area, it was going to refocus the office on nuclear development and hydropower and fossil fuels. And my feeling, similar to yours and others, is that we already have the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission, and you already have a development and agency really pushing those sort of things forward. I have a different understanding about the office itself, and this was kind of brinkmanship. I was under the impression that its authorization goes away in July, or either that or it has authorization but no funding. And so both the CC4CA and Colorado, our commissioners and counties acting together, were waiting to see what was going to happen in the House yesterday in terms of amending what came out of the Senate. And oddly enough, what seems to have happened is that a new bill was introduced, 1373, from two House Democrats with no Republican sponsors in the Senate, to do a general fund transfer to the Colorado Energy Office to keep it open with funds without those conditions. So I have a feeling this is just going to be a train wreck between the two, and who knows what's really going to happen. The concern, similar to, again, you were mentioning, is that programs like the weatherization program or commercial PACE might be endangered if the office is not continued. On the other hand, they may well be able to transfer the responsibility and the oversight management for the weatherization program to something like the Department of Local Affairs. So it doesn't mean that it has to go away as much as perhaps they, delegate it and have the responsibilities going to another. The overall feeling was that weighing in one side or the other wasn't going to make much difference on either of these bills, because it's a political power struggle between the two. Yeah. And so that's we were just waiting to see, is it worth weighing in or not? I sat in on the conference call last week about this as well. So yeah. I don't know where they're going from here.
Also, CC4CA took a neutral position on it, just to sit back and watch and observe what happens, and then be ready for last-minute phone calls if necessary to try to support different amendments or one thing or the other.
Yeah.
One thing I talked to Kara about, and I observed it on this bill, the Senate committee took remote testimony from Colorado Mesa University from about 7 people who were all in favor of the bill. It was all Kristen Reese, 2 county commissioners, people from the oil and gas industry, all strongly supporting, conservative people strongly supporting the bill. And that concerned me that there are only several of the remote testimony sites in the state, and one of them is in Grand Junction. Why don't we have one in Glenwood Springs at CMC where we could go do remote testimony? Why don't they have one up in Steamboat Springs, or different places where you could do remote testimony to level the playing field and make it easier for people of both stripes from the political spectrum, to make it easier for people to testify. And so that might be an issue that we would want to take up the legislature next year, to try to get more remote testimony sites.
That's a great heads up, Steve, frankly, because CCI is going to be asking us all for potential legislation for the 2018 session to literally, they have like a June or July deadline for that, and then they start shopping it around through the district meetings in August, and then vetting it further and final vote in October, whether to make it part of a CCI legislative agenda. So thinking about that would be important. It was kind of an experiment that they've been rolling out to even do remote testimony. I don't know if it's been happening for 2 years now, but not very long. And so I see no reason not to ask for that. I do know there was a bill that was for requiring grocery stores to put a label out if it was Colorado beef, because the national labeling of origin laws went away. And they were taking remote testimony, and it took them over 3 hours with the remote testimony. And so I don't know that the legislature is going to want to expand that. And but I think it should. And I also don't know if it's as effective as in person, frankly. But it's a really good point and a good observation. And their feeling was that, hey, it's a 2-hour drive now to Grand Junction instead of a 4-hour drive to Denver. So we're improving it. So, but we should talk about future legislative agenda items. The other one I should update you guys on, and I don't know the bill number either. I tend to know the bills, but not the numbers. They kind of lose me with 750 bills introduced. But that is the hospital provider fee. And there was a grand bargain made, which is good. It's going to be very important for rural hospitals. It will include lowering the Tabor cap down by $200 million, but moving these fees out into an enterprise zone. Some of that will be funding dedicated to rural transportation improvements, and I believe still some for rural schools. So it's kind of a little bit here and a little bit there, and maybe a little extra space in the middle for future growth and revenue in the state budget before it hits the Tabor cap. One of the kind of important items that was interesting, and everybody had to give something, I guess, but they're going to raise the business personal property tax exemption to $18,000. Currently, it's up to each county to set that exemption, and and so some have eliminated the tax entirely, and others have set exemption levels. But I understand that it's going to become a tax credit as opposed to reduced out of our county budget. So if someone was taking that exemption, or they paid the business personal property tax here, the first $18,000 or worth, whatever the tax would be on that, would become a credit on their Colorado income tax. So it sounded like it's not coming out of school districts, special districts, and county budgets, which was the concern before, that there'd be no backfill from the state general fund. So that does seem to be moving forward, and it just creates, everything. It's almost like trying to extend your landfill. There's going to be an end point, and so they just keep putting little teeny fixes that keep the budget whole for maybe 2 more years or 3 more years. I think that we may see something, say, in 2018 of, say, debrucing severance tax from removing them from Tabor restrictions in the state or something like that, so that they don't keep bouncing up against the headlines or the Tabor limit. And that was the biggest concern that Colorado Municipal League had, was that by lowering the Tabor limit, it could become very difficult for some communities to actually use their severance tax, or for the state to keep all their severance tax. So they'll have to come up with another Band-Aid to fix that. And that's all I really have, and tomorrow it's all over.
Okay.
We start again.
Okay.
All right, so the last item, George, if you're okay with us continuing on with the open discussion,
Yeah,
was to
please.
bring back the library board appointments. The board has interviewed all the applicants that we have at this time. We have one application for renewal, John Kelleher. You might recall the others interviewed included Ashley Conley, Elizabeth Nix, David Bentley, and Georgina Melby. Really a pretty fantastic group of applicants. Kathy, you're doing something really right out there to generate interest in the library. But there are no other applicants to interview at this point, and so staff wanted to bring it back to discussion with the board to get some direction.
We have one seat open. That's the returning John
One seat
Keller.
I have a question. Maybe Kathy, you can answer unless John doesn't know. John Kelleher, he actually filled in a position from Jim Moran, and to finish out his term. So how long had he served in that?
For this term, he's served a year and a half, but he was also on the library board when the library building was built, and as a volunteer served as the project manager while he was a board member back in around 1991.
Okay, all right. And so, and then the full term is, how long is a full term?
4 years.
Okay, great, thanks.
And can I ask John, can you read those names one more time, because I got shorted on one of them.
Give me just a second. Get back to... So, John Kelleher, who is currently on, Ashley Conley, Elizabeth Nix, David Bentley, and Georgina Melby.
That's it, Georgina.
Okay, board?
We have no avenue for alternates at this point. Is that correct?
Well, we have had alternates on the library board in the past, and we brought it up at the last library board meeting, and they were enthusiastic about just making a little switch to the bylaws. And
You have to change the bylaws in order to do that. I think we had such a great field of candidates that I would like to see the library do that, to create 2 alternate positions, and then let us reappoint now and bring back the other 3 candidates for further discussion once because we can't really appoint them now because we don't have the bylaws allowing us to do that.
Okay, good idea. Steve?
My feeling on somebody who is on a board, on one of our advisory boards, and is, they're volunteering their time, and if there is not some big red flag that's up there saying this person should not be on this board, it would be a poison thing for us to deny somebody to renew on a board that they're serving on already, because then people would be afraid to even apply for a board. We're grateful to have people on the boards, and to me it would be the wrong thing to deny somebody to continue on a board where they're doing I don't know what kind of a job John does, but knowing him personally, I think he's probably doing a really good job on the board. And so I would vote for John. I would also love to see alternates on the board, because this was a terrific group of applicants, and if we could tap into them get their energy involved in it, that would be really good.
George, can I just touch on what he said real quick? I don't disagree, but I think when we have good applicants that come forward, I don't think there's any reason why we should just automatically just appoint somebody who's on the board. But I think that John stepped in at a time that we needed him to step in when Jim Moran passed. So I think giving him, providing him a term for 4 years, I think John does a great job, and he does commit himself to this community and to this library. So even though I think there were other candidates who really bring a lot of vitality, that's why I want to create the alternate positions. But I would support John at this time.
Okay. Rachel, Greg?
Yeah. I fully agree, and we've discussed this a little bit with the addition to create some alternate positions. I think that that's very important. And, go a little bit further. I'd love to see the library create a couple of either advisory committees or subcommittees, and to collect input on some specific topics. Say, even just if you were doing, and you do great programs already, it's more a matter of people feeling like they're participating and they're understanding the programming and things like that. But you could really have a parents under 8 type of advisory committee that maybe just met twice a year. Not that it's an ongoing thing, but there's, I think, a little bit about the school district, and they've been able to involve parents through a financial advisory board, and then they have some subcommittees about other activities. And with the modernization and the incredible improvements we've made to our library, the whole goal was to become that hub of community activity and innovation and activities. So, I could literally see having a young people's advisory board for people 21 to 14, so that our high schoolers felt like they had a bit of a input, even if it's just, again, meeting twice a year or once a year or something like that. So I want to see the library board finding new ways to continue to enmesh themselves in the community and get the community enmeshed in participating in the library. I tell you, I looked at this entire list of people, and I would like to appoint every single one of them. That's the challenge. And it's not so much rewarding someone for previous work or commitment like John Kelleher, as much as acknowledging that it's been good work, it's been sacrifice and commitment. So those things are important. I also really actually am very supportive of David Bentley as an appointment on the board. I've really weighed this very long and hard with a lot of thought here. And I recall particularly he applied before, and I had supported him before. And I think he would bring a different dynamic to the board and a point of view to the board. And but I could look at this list and see others who are like, this would bring more of a mother's point of view who has young children. Or this is someone who's more connected with the Writers Foundation and young authors and literature. So I'm having a really, really hard time with this, and I'm just kind of wondering how quickly we may be able to act to amend the bylaws to be able to actually have those alternates happen.
We can ask that it be done quickly.
Yeah. It would probably be a 2-meeting thing. And you guys currently meet once a month, or could you have a couple special meetings so that it wouldn't be September before we can appoint?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'd like the board to do that, but I'd be wary about having the board come in on for doing additional work. I mean, that board had worked extremely hard the last couple of years in terms of getting this addition done. So I would just let it run its course. But who do you support for this position, Rachel?
I'm going to support David Bentley.
Okay, thank you. And then Greg?
I'm going to echo everything Rachel said, and I hear what everyone else said as well. Clearly, the library is, it turns out, it's really an important community asset, and people are wanting to participate in a great way. So perhaps we should all be looking for more ways for people to be involved. And same thing, everybody on this list I thought would be a great asset. So this is a tough one for me. I know some of these people very well, others I don't know as well, but I really admire them And I'd like to see them all involved somehow, and I'm hoping that we can reach out to them to volunteer or be involved in some way in the future. As for a vote, I'm thinking, I guess I'm going to say John Kelleher, because I like to see that he's able to complete what he's started with the board for that reason. I know David Bentley would be a great asset, and as well would probably be my second choice. And I think I'll just leave it at that, as much as I liked everybody who came in.
Okay, I'll support John Kelleher, so I think we have that.
And the only other one we need to talk about is weed board, right, John?
I think we have one more applicant, if I remember.
But we have enough openings to go ahead and make an
For the
appointment
weed
now.
board?
Well, we appointed 2 people
Alrighty.
last week.
So I need to double check, but I did ask, and I think Charlotte did say we have another applicant.
But we have enough openings, so we could go ahead and appoint Christy now if we wanted to. I mean, I don't think there's a question there.
I agree. I'd like to double check.
Yeah, but we
barring that there's another person and only one opening, let's appoint them.
There's 2 more openings.
That's what I thought, yeah. So
And if there is another person, and if they are a Snowmass Village resident, then the Snowmass Village residents would get the regular voting member position.
All right, so let's wait till we could do this next Tuesday. We could do this next Tuesday. We'll confirm with
Okay, if you want to wait,
with
that's
Charlotte.
fine. Okay, thanks for bringing
Great,
that up.
thanks, Kathy.
Thank you,
Okay,
Kathy.
anybody else have anything for open discussion?
It's raining and thundering and lightning.
Was that somebody working on the roof, or was that thunder?
And first rainbow, double rainbow yesterday on the Smuggler. First rainbow of
yeah.
the season.
Anybody have anything else for open discussion? See none, we'll adjourn, and we'll be back here tomorrow at noon. Thanks,
all right.
Grassroots.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Good job on that.